Captains Courageous by Rudyard Kipling. Chapter 1. The weather door of the smoking room had been left open to the North Atlantic fog, as the big liner rolled and lifted, whistling to warn the fishing fleet. "That Shane boy's the biggest nuisance aboard," said a man in a frieze overcoat, shutting the door with a bang. "He isn't wanted here. He's too fresh." A white-haired German reached for a sandwich and grunted between bites. "I know der breed. America is full of dat kind. I tell you, you should import rope's ends free under your tariff." "Pshaw! There isn't any real harm to him. He's more to be pitied than anything," a man from New York drawled, as he lay at full length along the cushions under the wet skylight. "They've dragged him around from hotel to hotel ever since he was a kid. I was talking to his mother this morning. She's a lovely lady, but she don't pretend to manage him. He's going to Europe to finish his education." "Education isn't begun yet." This was a Philadelphian curled up in a corner. "That boy gets $200 a month pocket money, he told me. He isn't 16 either." "Railroads, his father, aren't it?" said the German. "Yep. That and mines and lumber and shipping. Built one place at San Diego, the old man has. Another at Los Angeles. Owns half a dozen railroads. Half the lumber on the Pacific slope, and lets his wife spend the money." The Philadelphian went on lazily. "The West don't suit her, she says. She just tracks around with the boy and her nerves, trying to find out what'll amuse him, I guess. Florida, Adirondacks, Lakewood, Hot Springs, New York, round again. He isn't much more than a second-hand hotel clerk now. When he's finished in Europe, he'll be a holy terror." "What's the matter with the old man attending to him personally?" said a voice from the frieze ulster. "Old man's piling up the rocks. Don't want to be disturbed, I guess. He'll find out his error a few years from now. Pity, because there's a heap of good in the boy, if you could get at it." "Mit a rope's end, mit a rope's end," growled the German. Once more the door banged, and a slight, slim-built boy, perhaps 15 years old, a half-smoked cigarette hanging from one corner of his mouth, leaned in over the high footway. His pasty yellow complexion did not show well on a person of his years, and his look was a mixture of irresolution, bravado, and very cheap smartness. He was dressed in a cherry-colored blazer, knickerbockers, red stockings, and bicycle shoes, with a red flannel cap at the back of his head. After whistling between his teeth as he eyed the company, he said in a loud voice, "Say, it's thick outside. You can hear the fish boats squawking all around us. Say, wouldn't it be great if we ran one down?" "Shut the door, Harvey," said the New Yorker. "Shut the door, and stay outside. You're not wanted here."
"Who'll stop me?" he answered deliberately. "Did you pay for my passage, Mr. Martin? Guess I've as good right here as the next man." He picked up some dice from a checkerboard and began throwing, right hand against left. "Say, gentlemen, this is deader'n mud. Can't we make a game of poker between us?" There was no answer, and he puffed his cigarette, swung his legs, and drummed on the table with rather dirty fingers. Then he pulled out a roll of bills as if to count them. "How's your mamma this afternoon?" a man said. "I didn't see her at lunch." "In her stateroom, I guess. She's most always sick on the ocean. I'm going to give the stewardess $15 for looking after her. I don't go down more'n I can avoid. It makes me feel mysterious to pass that butler's pantry place. Say, this is the first time I've been on the ocean."
"Oh, don't apologize, Harvey."
"Who's apologizing? This is the first time I've crossed the ocean, gentlemen, and, except the first day, I haven't been sick one little bit. No, sir." He brought down his fist with a triumphant bang, wetted his finger, and went on counting the bills. "Oh, you're a high-grade machine with the writing in plain sight. The Philadelphian yawned. "You'll blossom into a credit to your country if you don't take care." "I know it. I'm an American, first, last, and all the time. I'll show 'em that when I strike Europe. Piff! My cig's out. I can't smoke the truck the steward sells. Any gentleman got a real Turkish cig on him?" The chief engineer entered for a moment, red, smiling, and wet. "Say, Mac," cried Harvey cheerfully, "how are we hittin' it?"
"Very much in the ordinary way," was the grave reply. "The young are as polite as ever to their elders, and their elders are trying to appreciate it." A low chuckle came from a corner. The German opened his cigar case and handed a skinny black cigar to Harvey. "Dot is the proper apparatus to smoke, my young friend," he said. "You will try it? Yes? Then you will be ever so happy." Harvey lit the unlovely thing with a flourish. He felt that he was getting on in grown-up society. "It would take more than this to keel me over," he said, ignorant that he was lighting that terrible article, a Wheeling stogie. "Dot we will presently see," said the German. "Where are we now, Mr. Macdonald?" "Just there or thereabouts, Mr. Schaefer," said the engineer. "We'll be on the Grand Bank tonight, but in a general way o' speakin', we're all among the fishing fleet now. We've shaved 3 dories and near scalped the boom off a Frenchman since noon, and that's close sailin', you may say." "You like my cigar, eh?" the German asked, for Harvey's eyes were full of tears.
"Fine, full flavor," he answered through shut teeth. "Guess we've slowed down a little, haven't we? I'll skip out and see what the log says." "I might if I fuss you," said the German. Harvey staggered over the wet decks to the nearest rail. He was very unhappy, but he saw the deck steward lashing chairs together, and, since he had boasted before the man that he was never seasick, his pride made him go aft to the second saloon deck at the stem, which was finished in a turtle-back. The deck was deserted, and he crawled to the extreme end of it near the flagpole. There he doubled up in limp agony, for the Wheeling stogie joined with the surge and jar of the screw to sieve out his soul. His head swelled, sparks of fire danced before his eyes, his body seemed to lose weight, while his heels wavered in the breeze. He was fainting from seasickness, and a roll of the ship tilted him over the rail on to the smooth lip of the turtle-back. Then a long, gray mother wave swung out of the fog, tucked Harvey under one arm, so to speak, and pulled him off and away to leeward. The great green closed over him, and he went quietly to sleep. He was roused by the sound of a dinner horn such as they used to blow at a summer school he had once attended in the Adirondacks. Slowly he remembered that he was Harvey Cheyne, drowned and dead in mid-ocean, but was too weak to fit things together. A new smell filled his nostrils, wet and clammy chills ran down his back, and he was helplessly full of salt water. When he opened his eyes he perceived that he was still on top of the sea, for it was running round him in silver-coloured hills, and he was lying on a pile of half-dead fish, looking at a broad human back clothed in a blue jersey. "It's no good," thought the boy. "I'm dead, sure enough, and this thing is in charge." He groaned, and the figure turned its head, showing a pair of little gold rings half hidden in curly black hair. "Aha! You feel some pretty well now?" it said. "Lie still so. We trim better." With a swift jerk he sculled the flickering boat-head on to a foamless sea that lifted her 20 full feet, only to slide her into a glassy pit beyond. But this mountain climbing did not interrupt Blue Jersey's talk. "Fine good job, I say, that I catch you. Eh, what? Better good job, I say, your boat not catch me. How you come to fall out?" "I was sick," said Harvey. "Sick and couldn't help it."
Just in time I blow my horn, and your boat she yaw a little. Then I see you come all down. Eh, what? I think you're cut into baits by the screw, but you are dreeft to me, and I make a big fish of you. So you shall not die this time." "Where am I?" said Harvey, who could not see that life was particularly safe where he lay. "You are with me in the dory. Manuel my name, and I come from schooner We're Here of Gloucester. I live to Gloucester. By and by we get supper. Eh, what?" He seemed to have two pairs of hands and a head of cast iron, for, not content with blowing through a big conch shell, he must needs stand up to it, swaying with the sway of the flat-bottomed dory, and send a grinding, thuttering shriek through the fog. How long this entertainment lasted, Harvey could not remember, for he lay back terrified at the sight of the smoking swells. He fancied he heard a gun, and a horn, and a shouting. Something bigger than the dory, but quite as lively, loomed alongside. Several voices talked at once. He was dropped into a dark, heaving hole, where men in oilskins gave him a hot drink and took off his clothes, and he fell asleep. When he waked, he listened for the first breakfast bell on the steamer, wondering why his state-room had grown so small. Turning, he looked into a narrow triangular cave, lit by a lamp hung against a huge square beam. A three-cornered table within arm's reach ran from the angle of the bows to the foremast. At the after end, behind a well-used Plymouth stove, sat a boy about his own age, with a flat red face and a pair of twinkling gray eyes. He was dressed in a blue jersey and high rubber boots. Several pairs of the same sort of footwear, an old cap, and some worn-out woolen socks lay on the floor, and black and yellow oilskins swayed to and fro beside the bunks. The place was packed as full of smells as a bale is of cotton. The oilskins had a peculiarly thick flavor of their own, which made a sort of background to the smells of fried fish, burnt grease, paint, pepper, and stale tobacco. But these, again, were all hooped together by one encircling smell of ship and salt water. Harvey saw with disgust that there were no sheets on his bed-place. He was lying on a piece of dingy ticking full of lumps and nubbles. Then, too, the boat's motion was not that of a steamer. She was neither sliding nor rolling, but rather wriggling herself about in a silly, aimless way, like a colt at the end of a halter. Water noises ran by close to his ear, and beams creaked and whined about him. All these things made him grunt despairingly and think of his mother. "Feelin' better?" said the boy, with a grin. "Have some coffee?" He brought a tin cup full, and sweetened it with molasses. "Isn't there milk?" said Harvey, looking round the dark double tier of bunks as if he expected to find a cow there. "Well, no," said the boy. "Ner there ain't likely to be till about mid-September. 'Tain't bad coffee. I made it." Harvey drank in silence, and the boy handed him a plate full of pieces of crisp fried pork, which he ate ravenously. "I've dried your clothes. Guess they've shrunk some," said the boy. "They ain't our style much, none of 'em. Twist round and see if you hurt any." Harvey stretched himself in every direction, but could not report any injuries. "That's good," the boy said heartily. "Fix yourself and go on deck. Dad wants to see you. I'm his son. Dan, they call me, and I'm cook's helper and everything else aboard that's too dirty for the men. There ain't no boy here 'cept me since Otto went overboard, and he was only a Dutchy, and 20-year-old at that. How'd you come to fall off in a dead flat calm?" "'Twasn't a calm," said Harvey sulkily. "It was a gale, and I was seasick. Guess I must have rolled over the rail." "There was a little common swell yesterday and last night," said the boy. "But if that's your notion of a gale," he whistled, "whew, you'll know more 'fore you're through. Hurry, Dad's waitin'." Like many other unfortunate young people, Harvey had never in all his life received a direct order.
never, at least, without long and sometimes tearful explanations of the advantage of obedience and the reasons for the request. Mrs. Cheyne lived in fear of breaking his spirit, which, perhaps, was the reason that she herself walked on the edge of nervous prostration. He could not see why he should be expected to hurry for any man's pleasure, and said so. "Your dad can come down here if he's so anxious to talk to me. I want him to take me to New York right away. It'll pay him." Dan opened his eyes as the size and beauty of this joke dawned on him. "Say, Dad," he shouted up the fo'c'sle hatch, "he says you can slip down and see him if you're anxious that way. Hear, Dad?" The answer came back in the deepest voice Harvey had ever heard from a human chest. "Quit foolin', Dan, and send him to me." Dan sniggered and threw Harvey his warped bicycle shoes. There was something in the tones on the deck that made the boy dissemble his extreme rage and console himself with the thought of gradually unfolding the tale of his own and his father's wealth on the voyage home. This rescue would certainly make him a hero among his friends for life. He hoisted himself on deck up a perpendicular ladder, and stumbled aft over a score of obstructions, to where a small, thick-set, clean-shaven man with gray eyebrows sat on a step that led up to the quarter-deck. The swell had passed in the night, leaving a long, oily sea, dotted round the horizon with the sails of a dozen fishing-boats. Between them lay little black specks showing where the dories were out fishing. The schooner, with a triangular riding sail on the mainmast, played easily at anchor, and except for the man by the cabin roof, house they call it, she was deserted.
"Mornin'. Good afternoon, I should say. You've nigh slept the clock round, young feller," was the greeting.
"Mornin'," said Harvey. He did not like being called young feller, and as one rescued from drowning expected sympathy. His mother suffered agonies whenever he got his feet wet, but this mariner did not seem excited.
"Now, let's hear all about it. It's quite providential, first and last, for all concerned. What might be your name? Where from? We mistrust it's New York. And where bound? We mistrust it's Europe."
Harvey gave his name, the name of the steamer, and a short history of the accident, winding up with a demand to be taken back immediately to New York, where his father would pay anything any one chose to name.
Said the shaven man, quite unmoved by the end of Harvey's speech. "I can't say we think special of any man, or boy even, that falls overboard from that kind of packet in a flat calm. Least of all when his excuse is that he's seasick."
"Excuse!" cried Harvey. "Do you suppose I'd fall overboard into your dirty little boat for fun?"
"Not knowin' what your notions of fun may be, I can't rightly say, young feller. But if I was you, I wouldn't call the boat which, under Providence, was the means of savin' you, names. In the first place, it's blame irreligious. In the second, it's annoying to my feelin's, and I'm Disco Troop of the We're Here, a Gloucester, which you don't seem rightly to know."
"I don't know and I don't care," said Harvey. "I'm grateful enough for being saved and all that, of course, but I want you to understand that the sooner you take me back to New York, the better it'll pay you."
"Meanin' how?"
Troop raised one shaggy eyebrow over a suspiciously mild blue eye. "Dollars and cents," said Harvey, delighted to think that he was making an impression. "Cold dollars and cents." He thrust a hand into a pocket and threw out his stomach a little, which was his way of being grand. "You've done the best day's work you ever did in your life when you pulled me in. I'm all the son Harvey Cheyne has."
"He's been favored," said Disco, dryly.
"And if you don't know who Harvey Cheyne is, you don't know much. That's all. Now turn her around and let's hurry." Harvey had a notion that the greater part of America was filled with people discussing and envying his father's dollars.
"Maybe I do, and maybe I don't. Take a reef in your stomach, young feller. It's full of my vittles."
Harvey heard a chuckle from Dan, who was pretending to be busy by the stump foremast, and the blood rushed to his face. "We'll pay for that, too," he said. "When do you suppose we shall get to New York?"
"I don't use New York any, nor Boston. We may see Eastern Point about September, and your pa. I'm real sorry I ain't here to tell of him. May give me $10 after all your talk. Then, of course, he mayn't."
$10? Why, see here, Harvey dived into his pocket for the wad of bills. All he brought up was a soggy packet of cigarettes.
"Not lawful currency, and bad for the lungs. Heave 'em overboard, young feller, and try again."
"It's been stolen!" cried Harvey hotly.
"You'll have to wait till you see your pa to reward me, then?"
$134 all stolen," said Harvey, hunting wildly through his pockets. "Give them back." A curious change flitted across old Troop's hard face.
"What might you have been doing at your time of life with $134, young feller?"
"It was part of my pocket money for a month." This Harvey thought would be a knock-down blow, and it was, indirectly.
"Oh, $134 is only part of his pocket money, for 1 month only. You don't remember hitting anything when you fell over, do you? Crack against a stanchion, let's say? Old man Haskin of the East Wind," Troop seemed to be talking to himself, "he tripped on a hatch and butted the mainmast with his head, hardish. 'Baout 3 weeks afterwards, old man Haskin he would hev it that the East Wind was a commerce destroyin' man o' war, and so he declared war on Sable Island because it was British and the shoals run out too far. They sewed him up in a bed bag, his head and feet appearin', for the rest o' the trip, and now he's home in Essex playin' with little rag dolls."
Harvey choked with rage, but Troop went on consolingly.
"We're sorry for you. We're very sorry for you. And so young. We won't say no more about the money, I guess."
"Course you won't. You stole it."
"Suit yourself. We stole it, if it's any comfort to you. Now, about goin' back. Allowin' we could do it, which we can't. You ain't in no fit state to go back to your home, and we've just come on to the Banks, workin' for our bread. We don't see the half of $100 a month, let alone pocket money, and with good luck we'll be ashore again somewheres about the first weeks of September."
But it's May now, and I can't stay here doing nothing just because you want to fish. I can't, I tell you."
"Right and jest and right. No one asks you to do nothin'. There's a heap as you can do, for Otto he went overboard on Le Havre. I mistrust he lost his grip in a gale we found there. Anyways, he never come back to deny it. You've turned up plain, plumb providential for all concerned. I mistrust, though, there's ruther few things you can do. Ain't that so?"
"I can make it lively for you and your crowd when we get ashore," said Harvey with a vicious nod, murmuring vague threats about piracy, at which Troop almost, not quite, smiled.
"'Cept talk. I'd forgot that. You ain't asked to talk more'n you've a mind to aboard the We're Here. Keep your eyes open, and help Dan to do as he's bid, and such like, and I'll give you ain't wuth it, but I'll give 10 1/2 a month, say 35 at the end of the trip. A little work will ease up your head, and you can tell us all about your dad and your ma and your money afterwards."
"She's on the steamer," said Harvey, his eyes filled with tears. "Take me to New York at once."
Poor woman. Poor woman. When she has you back she'll forget it all, though. There's 8 of us on the We're Here, and if we went back now, it's more'n 1,000 miles, we'd lose the season. The men they wouldn't hev it, allowin' I was agreeable."
But my father would make it all right."
"He'd try. I don't doubt he'd try," said Troop. "But a whole season's catch is 8 men's bread, and you'll be better in your health when you see him in the fall. Go forward and help Dan. It's 10.5 a month, as I said, and, of course, all fine, just as the rest of us."
"Do you mean I'm to clean pots and pans and things?" said Harvey.
"And other things. You've no call to shout, young feller."
"I won't. My father will give you enough to buy this dirty little fish kettle." Harvey stamped on the deck. "10 times over, if you take me to New York safe, and you're in 130 by me anyway."
"How?" said Troop, the iron face darkening.
"How? You know how, well enough. On top of all that, you want me to do menial work." Harvey was very proud of that adjective. "Till the fall. I tell you I will not. You hear?" Troop regarded the top of the mainmast with deep interest for a while, as Harvey harangued fiercely all around him.
"Hush," he said at last. "I'm figuring out my responsibilities in my own mind. It's a matter of judgment."
Dan stole up and plucked Harvey by the elbow. "Don't go to tamperin' with Dad any more," he pleaded. "You've called him a thief 2 or 3 times over, and he don't take that from any livin' bein'." "I won't!" Harvey almost shrieked, disregarding the advice, and still Troop meditated.
"Seems kinder unneighborly," he said at last, his eye travelling down to Harvey. "I don't blame you, not a mite, young feller. Nor you won't blame me when the bile's out o' your system. Be sure you sense what I say. 10.5 fer second boy on the schooner, an' all fund. Fer to teach you and fer the sake o' your health. Yes or no?"
"No," said Harvey. "Take me back to New York, or I'll see you." He did not exactly remember what followed. He was lying in the scuppers, holding on to a nose that bled, while Troop looked down on him serenely.
"Dan," he said to his son, "I was set against this young feller when I first saw him, on account of hasty judgments. Never you be led astray by hasty judgments, Dan. Now I'm sorry for him, because he's clear distracted in his upper works. He ain't responsible for the names he's give me, nor fer his other statements, nor fer jumpin' overboard, which I'm about half convinced he did. You be gentle with him, Dan, or I'll give you twice what I give him. Them hemorrhages clears the head. Let him sluice it off."
Troop went down solemnly into the cabin, where he and the older men bunked, leaving Dan to comfort the luckless heir to 30 millions. End of chapter. Captains Courageous by Rudyard Kipling, Chapter 2. "I warned you," said Dan, as the drops fell thick and fast on the dark oiled planking. "Dad ain't noways hasty, but you fair earned it. Pshaw! There's no sense takin' on so." Harvey's shoulders were rising and falling in spasms of dry sobbing. "I know the feeling. First time Dad laid me out was the last, and that was my first trip. Makes you feel sickish and lonesome. I know." "It does," moaned Harvey. "That man's either crazy or drunk, and I can't do anything." "Don't say that to Dad," whispered Dan. "He's set agin all liquor. And, well, he told me you was the madman. What in creation made you call him a thief? He's my dad." Harvey sat up, mopped his nose, and told the story of the missing wad of bills. "I'm not crazy," he wound up. "Only your father has never seen more than a $5 bill at a time, and my father could buy up this boat once a week and never miss it." "You don't know what the We're Here's worth. Your dad must have a pile of money. How did he get it? Dad says loonies can't shake out a straight yarn. Go ahead." In gold mines and things, West." "I've read that kind of business. Out West, too. Does he go round with a pistol on a trick pony, same as the circus? They call that the Wild West, and I've heard that their spurs and bridles was solid silver." "You are a chump," said Harvey, amused in spite of himself. "My father hasn't any use for ponies. When he wants to ride, he takes his car." "How? Lobster car?" "No, his own private car, of course. You've seen a private car some time in your life." "Slatin Beeman, he has one," said Dan cautiously. "I saw her at the Union Depot in Boston, with 3 niggers hoggin' her run." Dan meant cleaning the windows. "But Slatin Beeman he owns about every railroad on Long Island, they say, and they say he's bought about half New Hampshire, and run a line fence round her, and filled her up with lions and tigers and bears and buffalo and crocodiles and such all. Slatin Beeman he's a millionaire. I've seen his car. Yes?" "Well, my father's what they call a multimillionaire, and he has 2 private cars. One's named for me, the Harvey, and one for my mother, the Constance." "Hold on," said Dan. "Dad don't ever let me swear, but I guess you can. 'Fore we go ahead, I want you to say hope you may die if you're lying." "Of course," said Harvey. "That ain't enough. Say, hope I may die if I ain't speaking truth." "Hope I may die right here," said Harvey, "if every word I've spoken isn't the cold truth." $134 in all?" said Dan. "I heard you talkin' to Dad, and I'd half looked you to be swallered up, same as Jonah." Harvey protested himself red in the face. Dan was a shrewd young person along his own lines, and 10 minutes' questioning convinced him that Harvey was not lying much. Besides, he had bound himself by the most terrible oath known to boyhood, and yet he sat alive, with a red-ended nose, in the scuppers, recounting marvels upon marvels. "Gosh!" said Dan at last, from the very bottom of his soul, when Harvey had completed an inventory of the car named in his honor. Then a grin of mischievous delight overspread his broad face. "I believe you, Harvey. Dad's made a mistake for once in his life." "He has, sure," said Harvey, who was meditating an early revenge. "He'll be mad clear through. Dad just hates to be mistook in his judgments." Dan lay back and slapped his thigh. "Oh, Harvey, don't you spile the catch by lettin' on." "I don't want to be knocked down again. I'll get even with him, though." "Never heard any man ever got even with Dad, but he'd knock you down again, sure. The more he was mistook, the more he'd do it. But gold mines and pistols—" "I never said a word about pistols," Harvey cut in, for he was on his oath. "That's so. No more you did. 2 private cars, then, one named for you and one for her, and $200 a month pocket money, all knocked into the scuppers for not working for 10.5 a month. It's the top haul of the season." He exploded with noiseless chuckles. "Then I was right?" said Harvey, who thought he had found a sympathizer. "You was wrong, the wrongest kind of wrong. You take right hold and pitch in alongside of me, or you'll catch it, and I'll catch it for backing you up. Dad always gives me double helps 'cause I'm his son, and he hates favorin' folk. Guess you're kind of mad at Dad. I've been that way time and again, but Dad's a mighty just man. All the fleet says so." "Looks like justice, this, don't it?" Harvey pointed to his outraged nose. "That's nothin'. Lets the shore blood out of you. Dad did it for your health. Say, though, I can't have dealin's with a man that thinks me or Dad or any one on the We're Here's a thief. We ain't any common wharf-end crowd by any manner o' means. We're fishermen, and we've shipped together for 6 years and more. Don't you make any mistake on that. I told you Dad don't let me swear. He calls 'em vain oaths, and pounds me. But if I could say what you said about your pap and his fixin's, I'd say that 'bout your dollars. I dunno what was in your pockets when I dried your kit, for I didn't look to see, but I'd say, usin' the very same words as you used jest now, neither me nor Dad, and we was the only two that teched you after you were brought aboard, knows anything about the money. That's my say. Now?" The bloodletting had certainly cleared Harvey's brain, and perhaps the loneliness of the sea had something to do with it. "That's all right," he said. Then he looked down confusedly. "Seems to me that for a fellow just saved from drowning I haven't been over and above grateful, Dan." "Well, you was shook up and silly," said Dan. "Anyway, there was only Dad and me aboard to see it. The cook, he don't count." "I might have thought about losin' the bills that way," Harvey said, half to himself, "instead of callin' everybody in sight a thief. Where's your father?" "In the cabin. What do you want of him again?" "You'll see," said Harvey, and he stepped, rather groggily, for his head was still singing, to the cabin steps, where the little ship's clock hung in plain sight of the wheel. Troop, in the chocolate and yellow painted cabin, was busy with a notebook and an enormous black pencil, which he sucked hard from time to time. "I haven't acted quite right," said Harvey, surprised at his own meekness.
"What's wrong now?" said the skipper. "Walked into Dan, have you?"
"No, it's about you."
"I'm here to listen."
"Well, I'm here to take things back," said Harvey, very quickly. "When a man's saved from drownin'..." He gulped.
"Eh? You'll make a man yet if you go on this way."
"He oughtn't begin by callin' people names."
"Jest and right. Right and jest," said Troop, with the ghost of a dry smile.
"So I'm here to say I'm sorry." Another big gulp. Troop heaved himself slowly off the locker he was sitting on and held out an 11-inch hand.
"I mistrusted 'twould do you sights o' good. And this shows I weren't mistook in my judgments."
A smothered chuckle on deck caught his ear.
"I am very seldom mistook in my judgments."
The 11-inch hand closed on Harvey's, numbing it to the elbow.
"We'll put a little more gristle to that 'fore we're done with you, young feller, and I don't think any worse o' you for anything that's gone by. You wasn't fairly responsible. Go right about your business, and you won't take no hurt."
"You're white," said Dan, as Harvey regained the deck, flushed to the tips of his ears. "I don't feel it," said he. "I didn't mean that way. I heard what Dad said. When Dad allows he don't think the worse of any man, Dad's give himself away. He hates to be mistook in his judgments, too. Ho, ho! Once Dad has a judgment, he'd sooner dip his colors to the British than change it. I'm glad it's settled right end up. Dad's right when he says he can't take you back. It's all the livin' we make here, fishin'. The men'll be back like sharks after a dead whale in half an hour." "What for?" said Harvey. "Supper, of course. Don't your stomach tell you? You've a heap to learn." "Guess I have," said Harvey dolefully, looking at the tangle of ropes and blocks overhead. "She's a daisy," said Dan, enthusiastically, misunderstanding the look. "Wait till our mainsail's bent and she walks home with all her salt wet. There's some work first, though." He pointed down into the darkness of the open main hatch between the two masts. "What's that for? It's all empty," said Harvey. "You and me and a few more have got to fill it," said Dan. "That's where the fish goes." "Alive?" said Harvey. "Well, no. They're supposed to be rather dead, and flat, and salt. There's 100 hogshead of salt in the bins, and we hain't more'n covered our dunnage to now." "Where are the fish, though?" "In the sea, they say. In the boats we pray," said Dan, quoting a fisherman's proverb. "You come in last night with about 40 of 'em." He pointed to a sort of wooden pen just in front of the quarter-deck. "You and me, we'll sluice that out when we're through. Said we'll hev full pens to-night. I've seen her down half a foot with fish waitin' to clean, an' we stood to the tables till we was splittin' ourselves instid o' them, we was so sleepy. Yes, they're comin' in now." Dan looked over the low bulwarks at half a dozen dories, rowing towards them over the shining, silky sea. "I've never seen the sea from so low down," said Harvey. "It's fine." The low sun made the water all purple and pinkish, with golden lights on the barrels of the long swells, and blue and green mackerel shades in the hollows. Each schooner in sight seemed to be pulling her dories toward her by invisible strings, and the little black figures in the tiny boats pulled like clockwork toys. "They've struck on good," said Dan, between his half-shut eyes. "Manuel hain't room for another fish. Low as a lily pad in still water, ain't he?" "Which is Manuel? I don't see how you can tell 'em way off, as you do." "Last boat to the south'ard. He fund you last night," said Dan, pointing. "Manuel rows Portugoosey, an' you can't mistake him. East of him he's a heap better'n he rows is Pennsylvania, loaded with saleratus by the looks of him. East o' him see how pretty they string out all along with the humpy shoulders is Long Jack. He's a Galway man inhabitin' South Boston, where they all live mostly, an' mostly them Galway men are good in a boat. North, away yonder you'll hear him tune up in a minute is Tom Platt. Man-o'-war's man he was on the old Ohio. First of our navy, he says, to go round the Horn. He never talks of much else, 'cept when he sings, but he has fair fishin' luck. There, what did I tell you?" A melodious bellow stole across the water from the northern dory. Harvey heard something about somebody's hands and feet being cold, and then: "Bring forth the chart, the doleful chart. See where the mountains meet. The clouds are thick around their heads, the mists around their feet." "Full boat," said Dan, with a chuckle. "If he gives us 'O Captain,' it's toppin' full." The bellow continued: "And now to thee, O Capting, most earnestly I pray, that they shall never bury me in church or cloister gray." "Double game for Tom Platt. He'll tell you all about the old Ohio to-morrow. See that blue dory behind him? He's my uncle, Dad's own brother, an' if there's any bad luck loose on the Banks she'll fetch up agin Uncle Salters, sure. Look how tender he's rowin'. I'll lay my wage an' share he's the only man stung up to-day, an' he's stung up good." "What'll sting him?" said Harvey, getting interested. "Strawberries mostly. Pumpkins sometimes, and sometimes lemons and cucumbers. Yes, he's stung up from his elbows down. That man's luck perfectly paralyzin'. Now we'll take a hold of the tackles and h'ist 'em in. Is it true what you told me jest now, that you never done a hand's turn o' work in all your born life? Must feel kinder awful, don't it?" "I'm goin' to try to work anyway," Harvey replied stoutly. "Only it's all dead new." "Lay a hold of that tackle, then, behind you." Harvey grabbed at a rope and long iron hook dangling from one of the stays of the mainmast, while Dan pulled down another that ran from something he called a topping lift, as Manuel drew alongside in his loaded dory. The Portuguese smiled a brilliant smile that Harvey learned to know well later, and a short-handled fork began to throw fish into the pen on deck. 231, he shouted. "Give him the hook," said Dan, and Harvey ran it into Manuel's hands. He slipped it through a loop of rope at the dory's bow, caught Dan's tackle, hooked it to the stern becket, and clambered into the schooner. "Pull!" shouted Dan, and Harvey pulled, astonished to find how easily the dory rose. "Hold on she don't nest in the crosstrees." Dan laughed, and Harvey held on, for the boat lay in the air above his head. "Lower away!" Dan shouted, and as Harvey lowered, Dan swayed the light boat with one hand till it landed softly just behind the mainmast. "They don't weigh nothin' empty. That was right smart for a passenger. There's more trick to it in a seaway." "Ha ha!" said Manuel, holding out a brown hand. "You are some pretty well now?
This time last night the fish they fish for you. Now you fish for fish. Eh, what?"
I'm ever so grateful," Harvey stammered, and his unfortunate hand stole to his pocket once more, but he remembered that he had no money to offer. When he knew Manuel better, the mere thought of the mistake he might have made would have covered him with hot, uneasy blushes in his bunk.
"There is no to be thankful for to me," said Manuel. "How shall I leave you drift all around the banks? Now you are a fishman, eh, what?" "Ooh! Ah!"
He bent backward and forward stiffly from the hips to get the kinks out of himself.
"I have not clean boat to day. Too busy. They struck on queek. Danny, my son, clean for me."
Harvey moved forward at once. Here was something he could do for the man who had saved his life. Dan threw him a swab, and he leaned over the dory, mopping up the slime clumsily, but with great good will. "Hike out the foot-boards. They slide in them grooves," said Dan. "Swab 'em and lay 'em down. Never let a foot-board jam. You may want her bad some day. Here's Long Jack." A stream of glittering fish flew into the pen from a dory alongside. "Manuel, you take the tackle. I'll fix the tables. Harvey, clear Manuel's boat. Long Jack's nestin' on the top of her." Harvey looked up from his swabbing at the bottom of another dory just above his head. "Jest like the Injun puzzle boxes, ain't they?" said Dan as the one boat dropped into the other.
"Takes to it like a duck to water,"
said Long Jack, a grizzly-chinned, long-lipped Galway man, bending to and fro exactly as Manuel had done. Disko in the cabin growled up the hatchway, and they could hear him suck his pencil.
149 and a half. Bad luck to ye, Discobolus," said Long Jack. "I'm murderin' myself to fill up your pockets. Slate it for a bad catch. The Portuguese has bait me." Whack came another dory alongside, and more fish shot into the pen. 203. Let's look at the passenger." The speaker was even larger than the Galway man, and his face was made curious by a purple cut running slantwise from his left eye to the right corner of his mouth. Not knowing what else to do, Harvey swabbed each dory as it came down, pulled out the footboards, and laid them in the bottom of the boat. "He's caught on good," said the scarred man, who was Tom Platt, watching him critically. "There are two ways of doing everything. One's fisher fashion, any end first and a slippery hitch over all, and the other's—"
"What we did on the old Ohio," Dan interrupted, brushing into the knot of men with a log board on legs. "Get out of here, Tom Platt, and leave me fix the tables." He jammed one end of the board into two nicks in the bulwarks, kicked out the leg, and ducked just in time to avoid a swinging blow from the man-o'-war's man.
"And they did that on the Ohio, too, Danny. See?" said Tom Platt, laughing.
"Guess they were swivel-eyed then, for it didn't get home, and I know who'll find his boots on the main truck if he don't leave us alone. Haul ahead. I'm busy, can't you see?"
"Danny, you lie on the cable and sleep all day," said Long Jack. "You're the height o' impidence, and I'm persuaded you'll corrupt our supercargo in a week."
"His name's Harvey," said Dan, waving two strangely shaped knives, "and he'll be worth 5 of any South Boston clam digger 'fore long." He laid the knives tastefully on the table, cocked his head on one side, and admired the effect. "I think it's 42," said a small voice overside, and there was a roar of laughter as another voice answered,
"Then my luck's turned fer once, 'cause I'm 45, though I be stung outer all shape."
42 or 45, I've lost count," the small voice said. "It's Penn and Uncle Salters countin' catch. This beats the circus any day," said Dan. "Jest look at them."
Come in," roared Long Jack. "It's wet out yonder, children." 42, ye said.
That was Uncle Salters. "I can't again, then," the voice replied meekly. The two dories swung together and bunted into the schooner's side.
"Patience o' Jerusalem,"
snapped Uncle Salters, backing water with a splash. "What possessed a farmer like you to set foot in a boat beats me. You've nigh stove me all up." "I'm sorry, Mr. Salters. I came to sea on account of nervous dyspepsia. You advised me, I think." "You and your nervous dyspepsy be drowned in the whale hole," roared Uncle Salters, a fat and tubby little man. "You're comin' down on me agin. Did you say 42 or 45?" "I've forgotten, Mr. Salters. Let's count." "Don't see as it could be 45. I'm 45," said Uncle Salters. "You count keerful, Penn." Disko Troop came out of the cabin. "Salters, you pitch your fish in now at once," he said in the tone of authority. "Don't spoil the catch, Dad," Dan murmured. "Them two are only just beginnin'." "Mother av delight! He's forkin' them one by one," howled Long Tom, as Uncle Salters got to work laboriously, the little man in the other dory counting a line of notches on the gunwale. "That was last week's catch," he said, looking up plaintively, his forefinger where he had left off. Manuel nudged Dan, who darted to the after tackle, and leaning far overside slipped the hook into the stern rope as Manuel made her fast forward. The others pulled gallantly and swung the boat in, man, fish, and all. 1, 2, 4, 9, said Tom Platt, counting with a practised eye. 47. Penn, you're it. Dan let the after tackle run, and slid him out of the stern onto the deck amid a torrent of his own fish. "Hold on!" roared Uncle Salters, bobbing by the waist. "Hold on! I'm a bit mixed up on my count." He had no time to protest, but was hove inboard and treated like Pennsylvania. 41, said Tom Platt. "Beat by a farmer, Salters, and you sech a sailor, too." "'Tweren't fair count," said he, stumbling out of the pen, "and I'm all stung up to pieces." His thick hands were puffy and mottled purply white. "Some folks will find strawberry bottom," said Dan, addressing the newly risen moon, "if they have to dive fer it, seems to me." "An' others," said Uncle Salters, "eats the fat o' the land in sloth, an' mocks their own blood kin." "Seat ye! Seat ye!" A voice Harvey had not heard called from the foc'sle. Disko Troop, Tom Platt, Long Jack, and Salters went forward on the word. Little Penn bent above his square deep sea reel and the tangled cod lines. Manuel lay down full length on the deck, and Dan dropped into the hold, where Harvey heard him banging casks with a hammer. "Salt," he said, returning. "Soon as we're through supper we get to dressing down. You'll pitch to Dad. Tom Platt and Dad they stow together, and you'll hear 'em arguin'. We're second half, you and me, and Manuel and Penn, the youth and beauty o' the boat." "What's the good o' that?" said Harvey. "I'm hungry." "They'll be through in a minute. Sniff! She smells good to night. Dad ship's a good cook if he do suffer with his brother. It's a full catch to day, ain't it?" He pointed to the pens piled high with cod. "What water did ye hev, Manuel?" 25, father," said the Portuguese sleepily. "They strike on good and queek. Some day I show you, Harvey." The moon was beginning to walk on the still sea before the elder men came aft. The cook had no need to cry second half. Dan and Manuel were down the hatch and at table ere Tom Platt, last and most deliberate of the elders, had finished wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Harvey followed Penn, and sat down before a tin pan of cod's tongues and sounds, mixed with scraps of pork and fried potato, a loaf of hot bread, and some black and powerful coffee. Hungry as they were, they waited while Pennsylvania solemnly asked a blessing. Then they stoked in silence till Dan drew breath over his tin cup and demanded of Harvey how he felt. "Most full, but there's just room for another piece." The cook was a huge jet-black negro, and unlike all the negroes Harvey had met, did not talk, contenting himself with smiles and dumb-show invitations to eat more. "See, Harvey," said Dan, rapping with his fork on the table. "It's jest as I said. The young and handsome men, like me and Pensy, and you and Manuel, we're second half, and we eats when the first half are through. They're the old fish, and they're mean and humpy, and their stomachs has to be humored, so they come first, which they don't deserve. Ain't that so, doctor?" The cook nodded. "Can't he talk?" said Harvey in a whisper. "'Nough to get along. Not much o' anything we know. His natural tongue's kinder curious. Comes from the innards of Cape Breton, he does, where the farmers speak home-made Scotch. Cape Breton's full o' niggers whose folk run in there durin' our war, and they talk like the farmers, all huffy-chuffy." "That is not Scotch," said Pennsylvania. "That is Gaelic. So I read in a book." "Penn reads a heap. Most of what he says is so, 'cep when it comes to account o' fish, eh?" "Does your father just let them say how many they've caught without checking them?" said Harvey. "Why, yes. Where's the sense of a man lyin' for a few old cod?" "Was a man once lied for his catch," Manuel put in. "Lied every day. 5, 10, 25 more fish than come he say there was." "Where was that?" said Dan. "None of our folk." "Frenchmen of Aguille." "Ah, those West Shore Frenchmen don't count anyways. Stands to reason they can't count. If you run across any of their soft hooks, Harvey, you'll know why," said Dan with an awful contempt. "Always more and never less, every time we come to dress." Long Jack roared down the hatch, and the second half scrambled up at once. The shadow of the masts and rigging, with the never furled riding sail, rolled to and fro on the heaving deck in the moonlight, and the pile of fish by the stern shone like a dump of fluid silver. In the hold there were tramplings and rumblings where Disko Troop and Tom Platt moved among the salt bins. Dan passed Harvey a pitchfork, and led him to the inboard end of the rough table, where Uncle Salters was drumming impatiently with a knife haft. A tub of salt water lay at his feet. "You pitch to Dad and Tom Platt down the hatch, and take keer Uncle Salters don't cut your eye out," said Dan, swinging himself into the hold. "I'll pass salt below." Penn and Manuel stood knee-deep among cod in the pen, flourishing drawn knives. Long Jack, a basket at his feet and mittens on his hands, faced Uncle Salters at the table, and Harvey stared at the pitchfork and the tub. "Hi!" shouted Manuel, stooping to the fish, and bringing one up with a finger under its gill and a finger in its eye. He laid it on the edge of the pen, the knife blade glimmered with a sound of tearing, and the fish, slit from throat to vent, with a nick on either side of the neck, dropped at Long Jack's feet. "Hi!" said Long Jack, with a scoop of his mittened hand. The cod's liver dropped in the basket. Another wrench and scoop sent the head and offal flying, and the empty fish slid across to Uncle Salters, who snorted fiercely. There was another sound of tearing, the backbone flew over the bulwarks, and the fish, headless, gutted and open, splashed in the tub, sending the salt water into Harvey's astonished mouth. After the first yell, the men were silent. The cod moved along as though they were alive, and long ere Harvey had ceased wondering at the miraculous dexterity of it all, his tub was full. "Pitch," grunted Uncle Salters, without turning his head, and Harvey pitched the fish by twos and threes down the hatch. "Hi! Pitch 'em bunchy!" shouted Dan. "Don't scatter. Uncle Salters is the best splitter in the fleet. Watch him mind his book." Indeed, it looked a little as though the round uncle were cutting magazine pages against time. Manuel's body, cramped over it from the hips, stayed like a statue, but his long arms grabbed the fish without ceasing. Little Penn toiled valiantly, but it was easy to see he was weak. Once or twice Manuel found time to help him without breaking the chain of supplies, and once Manuel howled because he had caught his finger in a Frenchman's hook. These hooks are made of soft metal, to be rebent after use, but the cod very often get away with them and are hooked again elsewhere, and that is one of the many reasons why the Gloucester boats despise the Frenchmen.
Down below, the rasping sound of rough salt rubbed on rough flesh sounded like the whirring of a grindstone, a steady undertune to the click-nick of the knives in the pen, the wrench and schloop of torn heads, dropped liver, and flying offal, the "Cra" of Uncle Salters's knife scooping away backbones, and the flap of wet, opened bodies falling into the tub. At the end of an hour Harvey would have given the world to rest, for fresh, wet cod weigh more than you would think, and his back ached with the steady pitching. But he felt for the first time in his life that he was one of a working gang of men, took pride in the thought, and held on sullenly. "Knife-o!" shouted Uncle Salters at last. Penn doubled up, gasping among the fish. Manuel bowed back and forth to supple himself, and Long Jack leaned over the bulwarks. The cook appeared, noiseless as a black shadow, collected a mass of backbones and heads, and retreated. "Blood ends for breakfast and head chowder," said Long Jack, smacking his lips. "Knife-ho!" repeated Uncle Salters, waving the flat, curved splitter's weapon. "Look by your foot, Harve!" cried Dan below. Harvey saw half a dozen knives stuck in a cleat in the hatch combing. He dealt these around, taking over the dulled ones. "Water," said Disko Troop. "Scuttlebutt's forward, and the dipper's alongside. Hurry, Harve," said Dan. He was back in a minute with a big dipper full of stale brown water which tasted like nectar, and loosed the jaws of Disko and Tom Platt. "These are cod," said Disko. "They ain't Damascus figs, Tom Platt, nor yet silver bars. I've told you that every single time since we've sailed together." "A matter o' 7 seasons," returned Tom Platt coolly. "Good stowin's good stowin' all the same, and there's a right and a wrong way o' stowin' ballast even. If you'd ever seen 400 ton o' iron set into the Hi!" With a yell from Manuel, the work began again, and never stopped till the pen was empty. The instant the last fish was down, Disko Troop rolled aft to the cabin with his brother. Manuel and Long Jack went forward. Tom Platt only waited long enough to slide home the hatch ere he too disappeared. In half a minute Harvey heard deep snores in the cabin, and he was staring blankly at Dan and Penn. "I did a little better that time, Danny," said Penn, whose eyelids were heavy with sleep. "But I think it is my duty to help clean." "Wouldn't hev your conscience for 1,000 quintal," said Dan. "Turn in, Penn. You've no call to do boy's work. Draw a bucket, Harvey. Oh, Penn, dump these in the gurry butt 'fore you sleep. Can you keep awake that long?" Penn took up the heavy basket of fish livers, emptied them into a cask with a hinged top, lashed by the foc'sle. Then he too dropped out of sight in the cabin. "Boys clean up after dressin' down, and first watch in calm weather is boys' watch on the We're Here." Dan sluiced the pen energetically, unshipped the table, set it up to dry in the moonlight, ran the red knife blades through a wad of oakum, and began to sharpen them on a tiny grindstone, as Harvey threw offal and backbones overboard under his direction. At the first splash a silvery white ghost rose bolt upright from the oily water and sighed a weir, whistling sigh. Harvey started back with a shout, but Dan only laughed. "Grampus," said he, "beggin' for fish heads. They up-end that way when they're hungry. Breath on him like the doleful tombs, hain't he?" A horrible stench of decayed fish filled the air as the pillar of white sank, and the water bubbled oilily. "Hain't you never seen a grampus up-end before? You'll see 'em by hundreds 'fore you're through. Say, it's good to have a boy aboard again. Otto was too old, and a Dutchy at that. Him and me we fought considerable. Wouldn't ha' keered for that if he'd had a Christian tongue in his head. Sleepy?" "Dead sleepy," said Harvey, nodding forward. "Mustn't sleep on watch. Rouse up and see if our anchor light's bright and shinin'. You're on watch now, Harve." "Pshaw! What's to hurt us? Bright as day." "Just when things happen, Dad says. Fine weather's good sleepin', and 'fore you know, maybe, you're cut in two by a liner,
and 17 brass-bound officers, all gentlemen, lift their hand to it that your lights was out and there was a thick fog. Harve, I've kind o' took to you, but if you nod once more I'll lay into you with a rope's end." The moon, who sees many strange things on the Banks, looked down on a slim youth in knickerbockers and a red jersey, staggering around the cluttered decks of a 70-ton schooner, while behind him, waving a knotted rope, walked, after the manner of an executioner, a boy who yawned and nodded between the blows he dealt. The lashed wheel groaned and kicked softly, the riding sails slatted a little in the shifts of the light wind, the windlass creaked, and the miserable procession continued. Harvey expostulated, threatened, whimpered, and at last wept outright, while Dan, the words clotting on his tongue, spoke of the beauty of watchfulness, and slashed away with the rope's end, punishing the dories as often as he hit Harvey. At last the clock in the cabin struck 10, and upon the 10th stroke little Penn crept on deck. He found 2 boys in 2 tumbled heaps side by side on the main hatch, so deeply asleep that he actually rolled them to their berths. End of chapter. Captains Courageous by Rudyard Kipling. Chapter 3. It was the 40-fathom slumber that clears the soul and eye and heart, and sends you to breakfast ravening. They emptied a big tin dish of juicy fragments of fish, the blood ends the cook had collected overnight. They cleaned up the plates and pans of the elder mess, who were out fishing, sliced pork for the midday meal, swabbed down the forecastle, filled the lamps, drew coal and water for the cook, and investigated the forehold, where the boat's stores were stacked. It was another perfect day, soft, mild, and clear, and Harvey breathed to the very bottom of his lungs. More schooners had crept up in the night, and the long blue seas were full of sails and dories. Far away on the horizon, the smoke of some liner, her hull invisible, smudged the blue, and to eastward a big ship's topgallant sails, just lifting, made a square nick in it. Disko Troop was smoking by the roof of the cabin, one eye on the craft around, and the other on the little fly at the mainmast head.
"When Dad kerflummoxes that way," said Dan in a whisper, "he's doin' some high-line thinkin' for all hands. I'll lay my wage and share we'll make berth soon. Dad he knows the cod, and the fleet they know Dad knows. See 'em comin' up, one by one, lookin' for nothin' in particular, o' course, but scrougin' on us all the time. There's the Prince Laboa, she's a Chatham boat. She's crep up since last night. And see that big one with a patch in her foresail and a new jib? She's the Carrie Pitman from West Chatham. She won't keep her canvas long on 'less her luck's changed since last season. She don't do much 'cept drift. There ain't an anchor mate'll hold her. When the smoke puffs up in little rings like that, Dad's studyin' the fish. If we speak to him now, he'll git mad. Last time I did, he just took and hove a boot at me." Disko Troop stared forward, the pipe between his teeth, with eyes that saw nothing. As his son said, he was studying the fish, pitting his knowledge and experience on the Banks against the roving cod in his own sea. He accepted the presence of the inquisitive schooners on the horizon as a compliment to his powers, but now that it was paid he wished to draw away and make his berth alone, till it was time to go up to the Virgin and fish in the streets of that roaring town upon the waters. So Disko Troop thought of recent weather, and gales, currents, food supplies, and other domestic arrangements, from the point of view of a 20-pound cod, was, in fact, for an hour a cod himself, and looked remarkably like one. Then he removed the pipe from his teeth.
"Dad," said Dan, "we've done our chores. Can't we go overside a piece? It's good catchin' weather."
Not in that cherry-colored rig nor them half-baked brown shoes. Give him something fit to wear.
"Dad's pleased. That settles it," said Dan delightedly, dragging Harvey into the cabin, while Troop pitched a key down the steps.
Dad keeps my spare rig where he can overhaul it, 'cause Ma says I'm keerless." He rummaged through a locker, and in less than 3 minutes Harvey was adorned with fisherman's rubber boots that came half up his thigh, a heavy blue jersey well darned at the elbows, a pair of flippers, and a sou'wester. "Now you look somethin' like," said Dan. "Hurry!"
"Keep nigh and handy," said Troop, "and don't go visitin' round the fleet. If anyone asks you what I'm calculatin' to do, speak the truth, fer you don't know." A little red dory, labeled Hattie S., lay astern of the schooner. Dan hauled in the painter and dropped lightly on to the bottom boards, while Harvey tumbled clumsily after. "That's no way of getting into a boat," said Dan. "If there was any sea, you'd go to the bottom sure. You've got to learn to meet her." Dan fitted the thole pins, took the forward thwart, and watched Harvey's work. The boy had rowed, in a ladylike fashion, on the Adirondack ponds, but there is a difference between squeaking pins and well-balanced rowlocks, light sculls and stubby 8-foot sea oars. They stuck in the gentle swell, and Harvey grunted. "Short. Row short," said Dan. "If you cramp your oar in any kind of sea, you're liable to turn her over. Ain't she a daisy? Mine, too." The little dory was specklessly clean. In her bows lay a tiny anchor, 2 jugs of water, and some 70 fathoms of thin, brown dory roding. A tin dinner horn rested in cleats just under Harvey's right hand, beside an ugly-looking maul, a short gaff, and a shorter wooden stick. A couple of lines, with very heavy leads and double cod-hooks, all neatly coiled on square reels, were stuck in their place by the gunwale. "Where's the sail and mast?" said Harvey, for his hands were beginning to blister. Dan chuckled. "You don't sail fishing dories much. You pull, but you needn't pull so hard. Don't you wish you owned her?" "Well, I guess my father might give me one or two if I asked him," Harvey replied. He had been too busy to think much of his family till then. "That's so. I forgot your dad's a millionaire. You don't act millionairy any, now. But a dory and craft and gear," Dan spoke as though she were a whaleboat, "costs a heap. Think your dad'd give you one for a pet like?" "Shouldn't wonder. It would be most the only thing I haven't stuck him for yet." "Must be a expensive kinder kid to home. Don't slitheroo that way, Harve. Short's the trick, because no sea's ever dead still, and the swells'll—" Crack! The loom of the oar kicked Harvey under the chin and knocked him backward. "That was what I was going to say. I had to learn too, but I wasn't more than 8 years old when I got my schoolin'." Harvey regained his seat with aching jaws and a frown. "No good gettin' mad at things, Dad says. It's our own fault if we can't handle 'em, he says. Let's try here. Manuel'll give us the water." The Portuguese was rocking fully a mile away, but when Dan upended an oar he waved his left arm 3 times. 30 fathom," said Dan, stringing a salt clam on to the hook. "Over with the doughboys. Bait same as I do, Harve, and don't snarl your reel." Dan's line was out long before Harvey had mastered the mystery of baiting and heaving out the leads. The dory drifted along easily. It was not worth while to anchor till they were sure of good ground. "Here we come!" Dan shouted, and a shower of spray rattled on Harvey's shoulders as a big cod flapped and kicked alongside. "Muckle, Harvey, muckle! Under your hand, quick!" Evidently muckle could not be the dinner horn, so Harvey passed over the maul, and Dan scientifically stunned the fish before he pulled it inboard, and wrenched out the hook with a short wooden stick he called a gobstick. Then Harvey felt a tug, and pulled up zealously. "Why, these are strawberries!" he shouted. "Look!" The hook had fouled among a bunch of strawberries, red on one side and white on the other, perfect reproductions of the land fruit, except that there were no leaves, and the stem was all pipy and slimy. "Don't touch 'em! Slat 'em off! Don't—" The warning came too late.
Harvey had picked them from the hook and was admiring them. "Ouch!" he cried, for his fingers throbbed as though he had grasped many nettles. "Now you know what strawberry bottom means. Nothin' 'cep fish should be touched with the naked fingers, Dad says. Slat 'em off agin the gunnel and bait up, Harve. Lookin' won't help any. It's all in the wages." Harvey smiled at the thought of his $10.50 a month, and wondered what his mother would say if she could see him hanging over the edge of a fishing dory in mid-ocean. She suffered agonies whenever he went out on Saranac Lake, and by the way, Harvey remembered distinctly that he used to laugh at her anxieties. Suddenly the line flashed through his hand, stinging even through the flippers, the woolen circlets supposed to protect it. "He's a logy! Give him room accordin' to his strength," cried Dan. "I'll help ye." "No, you won't," Harvey snapped as he hung on to the line. "It's my first fish. Is it a whale?" "Halibut, maybe." Dan peered down into the water alongside, and flourished the big muckle, ready for all chances. Something white and oval flickered and fluttered through the green. "I'll lay my wage and share he's over 100. Are you so everlastin' anxious to land him alone?" Harvey's knuckles were raw and bleeding where they had been banged against the gunwale. His face was purple-blue between excitement and exertion. He dripped with sweat, and was half blinded from staring at the circling sunlit ripples around the swiftly moving line. The boys were tired long ere the halibut, who took charge of them and the dory for the next 20 minutes. But the big flat fish was gaffed and hauled in at last. "Beginner's luck," said Dan, wiping his forehead. "He's all of 100." Harvey looked at the huge gray and mottled creature with unspeakable pride. He had seen halibut many times on marble slabs ashore, but it had never occurred to him to ask how they came inland. Now he knew, and every inch of his body ached with fatigue. "If Dad was along," said Dan, hauling up, "he'd read the signs plain's print. The fish are runnin' smaller and smaller, and you've took 'baout as logy a halibuts as we're apt to find this trip. Yesterday's catch, did you notice it? Was all big fish and no halibut. Dad he's read them signs right off. Dad says everything on the Banks is signs, and can be read wrong or right. Dad's deeper'n the whale hole." Even as he spoke, someone fired a pistol on the We're Here, and a potato basket was run up in the fore-rigging. "What did I say now? That's the call for the whole crowd. Dad's onter something, or he'd never break fishin' this time o' day. Reel up, Harve, and we'll pull back." They were to windward of the schooner, just ready to flirt the dory over the still sea, when sounds of woe half a mile off led them to Penn, who was careering about a fixed point, for all the world like a gigantic water-bug. The little man backed away and came down again with enormous energy, but at the end of each maneuver his dory swung round and snubbed herself on her rope. "We'll have to help him, else he'll root in seed here," said Dan. "What's the matter?" said Harvey. This was a new world, where he could not lay down the law to his elders, but had to ask questions humbly. And the sea was horribly big and unexcited. "Anchor's fouled. Penn's always losin' 'em. Lost 2 this trip already. On sandy bottom, too. And Dad says next one he loses, sure as fishin', he'll give him the kelleg. That'd break Penn's heart." "What's a kelleg?" said Harvey, who had a vague idea it might be some kind of marine torture, like keel-hauling in the story-books. "Big stone instead of an anchor. You can see a kelleg ridin' in the bow as fur as you can see a dory, and all the fleet knows what it means. They'd guy him dreadful. Penn couldn't stand that no more'n a dog with a dipper to his tail. He's so everlastin' sensitive. Hello, Penn! Stuck again? Don't try any more of your patents. Come up on her and keep your rodin' straight up and down." "It doesn't move," said the little man, panting. "It doesn't move at all, and indeed I tried everything." "What's all this hurrah's nest for'ard?" said Dan, pointing to a wild tangle of spare oars and dory roding, all matted together by the hand of inexperience. "Oh, that," said Penn proudly, "is a Spanish windlass. Mr. Salters showed me how to make it, but even that doesn't move her." Dan bent low over the gunwale to hide a smile, twitched once or twice on the roding, and behold, the anchor drew at once. "Haul up, Penn," he said, laughing, "or she'll get stuck again." They left him regarding the weed-hung flukes of the little anchor with big, pathetic blue eyes, and thanking them profusely. "Oh, say, while I think of it, Harve," said Dan, when they were out of earshot, "Penn ain't quite all caulked. He ain't nowise dangerous, but his mind's give out. See?" "Is that so, or is it one of your father's judgments?" Harvey asked as he bent to his oars. He felt he was learning to handle them more easily. "Dad ain't mistook this time. Penn's a sure enough loony. No, he ain't that exactly. So much as a harmless idjit. It was this way. You're rowing quite so, Harve. And I tell you 'cause it's right you oughter know. He was a Moravian preacher once. Jacob Boller was his name, Dad told me, and he lived with his wife and 4 children somewheres out Pennsylvania way. Well, Penn he took his folks along to a Moravian meeting, camp meeting most like, and they stayed over just one night in Johnstown. You've heerd talk of Johnstown?" Harvey considered. "Yes, I have, but I don't know why. It sticks in my head same as Ashtabula." "Both was big accidents, that's why, Harve. Well, that one single night Penn and his folks was to the hotel, Johnstown was wiped out. Dam bustin' flooded her, and the houses struck adrift and bumped into each other and sunk. I've seen the pictures, and they're dreadful. Penn he saw his folks drowned all in a heap 'fore he rightly knew what was comin'. His mind give out from that on. He mistrusted somethin' had happened up to Johnstown, but for the poor life of him he couldn't remember what, and he just drifted around smilin' and wonderin'. He didn't know what he was, nor yet what he had been. In that way he run agin Uncle Salters, who was visitin' Allegheny City. Half my mother's folks they live scattered inside of Pennsylvania, and Uncle Salters he visits around winters. Uncle Salters he kind of adopted Penn, well knowin' what his trouble was, and he brought him east, and he give him work on his farm." "Why, I heard him callin' Penn a farmer last night when the boats bumped. Is your Uncle Salters a farmer?" "Farmer!" shouted Dan. "There ain't water enough 'tween here and Hatteras to wash the fur mold off of his boots. He's just everlastin' farmer. Why, Harve, I've seen that man hitch up a bucket 'long towards sundown and set twiddlin' the spigot to the scuttle-butt same as 'twas a cow's bag. He's that much farmer. Well, Penn and he they ran the farm, up Exeter way 'twas. Uncle Salters he sold it this spring to a jay from Boston as wanted to build a summer house, and he got a heap for it. Well, them 2 loonies scratched along till, one day, Penn's church he'd belonged to, the Moravians, found out where he was drifted and layin', and wrote to Uncle Salters. Never heerd what they said exactly, but Uncle Salters was mad. He's a 'Piscopalian mostly, but he just let 'em have it both sides of the bow, 'sif he was a Baptist, and says he warn't goin' to give up Penn to any blame Moravian connection in Pennsylvania or anywheres else. Then he came to Dad, towin' Penn. That was 2 trips back, and says he and Penn must fish a trip for their health. Guess he thought the Moravians wouldn't hunt the banks for Jacob Boller. Dad was agreeable, for Uncle Salters had been fishin' off and on for 30 years, when he warn't inventing patent manures, and he took quarter share in the We're Here, and the trip done Penn so much good, Dad made a habit of taking him. Some day, Dad says, he'll remember his wife and kids and Johnstown, and then, like as not, he'll die, Dad says. Don't you talk about Johnstown nor such things to Penn, or Uncle Salters he'll heave you overboard." "Poor Penn," murmured Harvey. "I should never have thought Uncle Salters cared for him by the look of 'em together." "I like Penn, though. We all do," said Dan. "We ought to have give him a tow, but I wanted to tell you first." They were close to the schooner now. the other boats a little behind them.
"You needn't heave in the dories till after dinner," said Troop, from the deck. "We'll dress down right off. Fix table, boys."
"Deeper'n the Whale deep," said Dan, with a wink, as he set the gear for dressing down. "Look at them boats that have edged up since mornin'. They're all waitin' on Dad. See 'em, Harve?" "They are all alike to me." And indeed to a landsman the nodding schooners around seemed run from the same mould. "They ain't, though. That yaller dirty packet with its bowsprit steeved that way, she's the Hope of Prague. Nick Brady's her skipper, the meanest man on the Banks. We'll tell him so when we strike the main ledge. Way off yonder's the Day's Eye. The two Geralds own her. She's from Harwich, fastish, too, and his Good Luck, but Dad he'd find fish in a graveyard. Them other three, side along, they're the Margie Smith, Rose, and Edith C. Whalen, all from home. Guess we'll see the Abby M. Deering tomorrow, Dad, won't we? They're all slippin' over from the shoal o' Quiro."
"You won't see many boats tomorrow, Danny."
When Troop called his son Danny, it was a sign that the old man was pleased.
"Boys, we're too crowded," he went on, addressing the crew as they clambered inboard. "We'll leave 'em to bait big and catch small."
He looked at the catch in the pen, and it was curious to see how little and level the fish ran. Save for Harvey's halibut, there was nothing over 15 pounds on deck.
"I'm waiting on the weather," he added.
"You'll have to make it yourself, Disko, for there's no sign I can see,"
said Long Jack, sweeping the clear horizon. And yet, half an hour later, as they were dressing down, the Bank fog dropped on them. Between fish and fish, as they say, it drove steadily and in wreaths, curling and smoking along the colorless water. The men stopped dressing down without a word. Long Jack and Uncle Salters slipped the windlass brakes into their sockets, and began to heave up the anchor, the windlass jarring as the wet hempen cable strained on the barrel. Manuel and Tom Platt gave a hand at the last. The anchor came up with a sob, and the riding sail bellied as Troop steadied her at the wheel.
"Up jib and foresail," said he.
"Slip 'em in the smother,"
shouted Long Jack, making fast the jib sheet, while the others raised the clacking, rattling rings of the foresail, and the foreboom creaked as the We're Here looked up into the wind and dived off into blank, whirling white.
"There's wind behind this fog,"
said Troop. It was all wonderful beyond words to Harvey, and the most wonderful part was that he heard no orders except an occasional grunt from Troop, ending with,
"That's good, my son."
"Never seen anchor weighed before?" said Tom Platt to Harvey, gaping at the damp canvas of the foresail. "No. Where are we goin'?" "Fish and make berth, as you'll find out 'fore you've been a week aboard. It's all new to you, but we never know what may come to us. Now take me, Tom Platt. I'd never ha' thought—"
"It's better than $14 a month and a bullet in your belly," said Troop from the wheel. "Ease your jumbo a grind."
"Dollars and cents better," returned the man-o'-war's man, doing something to a big jib with a wooden spar tied to it. "But we didn't think of that when we manned the windlass brakes on the Miss Jim Buck outside Beaufort Harbor, with Fort Macon heaving hot shot at our stem, and a living gale atop of all. Where was you then, Disko?"
"Just here or hereabouts," Disko replied, "earning my bread on the deep waters, and dodging Reb privateers. Sorry I can't accommodate you with red-hot shot, Tom Platt, but I guess we'll come out all right on wind 'fore we see Eastern Point."
There was an incessant slapping and chatter at the bows now, varied by a solid thud and a little spout of spray that clattered down on the foc'sle. The rigging dripped clammy drops, and the men lounged along the lee of the house, all save Uncle Salters, who sat stiffly on the main hatch, nursing his stung hands.
"Guess she'd carry staysail,"
said Disko, rolling one eye at his brother.
"Guess she wouldn't to any sort o' profit. What's the sense of wasting canvas?"
the farmer sailor replied. The wheel twitched almost imperceptibly in Disko's hands.
A few seconds later a hissing wave top slashed diagonally across the boat, smote Uncle Salters between the shoulders, and drenched him from head to foot. He rose sputtering and went forward, only to catch another.
"See Dad chase him all around the deck," said Dan. "Uncle Salters, he thinks his quarter share's our canvas. Dad's put this duckin' act up on him 2 trips runnin'. Hi, that found him where he feeds."
Uncle Salters had taken refuge by the foremast, but a wave slapped him over the knees. Disko's face was as blank as the circle of the wheel. "Guess you'd lie easier under staysail, Salters," said Disko, as though he had seen nothing. "Set your old kite, then," roared the victim through a cloud of spray. "Only don't lay it to me if anything happens. Penn, you go below right off and get your coffee. And you ought to have more sense than to bum around on deck this weather."
"Now they'll swill coffee and play checkers till the cows come home," said Dan, as Uncle Salters hustled Penn into the fore cabin. "Looks to me like's if we'd all be doin' so for a spell. There's nothin' in creation deader limpsy idler'n a banker when she ain't on fish."
"I'm glad you spoke, Danny," cried Long Jack, who had been casting round in search of amusement. "I'd clean forgot we'd got a passenger under that T-wharf hat. There's no idleness for them that don't know their ropes. Pass him along, Tom Platt, and we'll larn him."
"'Tain't my trick this time," grinned Dan. "You've got to go it alone. Dan learned me with a rope's end."
For an hour Long Jack walked his prey up and down, teaching, as he said, things at the sea that ivery man must know, blind, drunk, or asleep. There is not much gear to a 70-ton schooner with a stump foremast, but Long Jack had a gift of expression. When he wished to draw Harvey's attention to the peak halyards, he dug his knuckles into the back of the boy's neck and kept him at gaze for half a minute. He emphasized the difference between fore and aft generally by rubbing Harvey's nose along a few feet of the boom, and the lead of each rope was fixed in Harvey's mind by the end of the rope itself. The lesson would have been easier had the deck been at all free, but there appeared to be a place on it for everything and anything except a man. Forward lay the windlass and its tackle, with the chain and hemp cables, all very unpleasant to trip over, the foc'sle stovepipe, and the gurry butts by the foc'sle hatch to hold the fish livers. Aft of these the foreboom and booby of the main hatch took all the space that was not needed for the pumps and dressing pens. Then came the nests of dories lashed to ring bolts by the quarter-deck, the house, with tubs and oddments lashed all around it, and last, the 60-foot main-boom, in its crutch, splitting things lengthwise, to duck and dodge under every time. Tom Platt, of course, could not keep his oar out of the business, but ranged alongside with enormous and unnecessary descriptions of sails and spars on the old Ohio.
"Never mind what he says. Attend to me, innocents. Tom Platt, this ballyhoo's not the Ohio, and you're mixin' the boy bad."
"He'll be ruined for life, beginning on a fore and after this way," Tom Platt pleaded. "Give him a chance to know a few leadin' principles. Sailin's an art, Harvey, and I'll show you if I had you in the foretop of the—"
"I know it. You'd talk him dead and cold. Silence, Tom Platt. Now, after all I've said, how'd you reef the foresail, Harve? Take your time answerin'."
"Haul that in," said Harvey, pointing to leeward.
"What? The North Atlantic?"
"No, the boom. Then run that rope you showed me back there."
"That's no way," Tom Platt burst in. "Quiet. He's larnin', and his not the name's good yet. Go on, Harve."
"Oh, it's the reef pennant. I'd hook the tackle onto the reef pennant, and then let down—" "Lower the sail, child, lower," said Tom Platt in a professional agony. "Lower the throat and peak halyards," Harvey went on. Those names stuck in his head.
"Lay your hand on 'em,"
said Long Jack. Harvey obeyed. "Lower till that roop lope on the after leach no, it's cringle, till the cringle was down on the boom. Then I'd tie her up the way you said, and then I'd hoist up the peak and throat halyards again.
You've forgot to pass the tack earing, but with time and help ye learn. There's good and just reason for every rope aboard, or else 'twould be overboard. Do ye follow me? 'Tis dollars and cents I'm puttin' into your pocket, ye skinny little supercargo, so that when you're filled out you can ship from Boston to Cuba and tell 'em Long Jack larned ye. Now I'll chase you around a piece, callin' the ropes, and you lay your hand on 'em as I call." He began, and Harvey, who was feeling rather tired, walked slowly to the rope named. A rope's end licked round his ribs, and nearly knocked the breath out of him. "When you own a boat," said Tom Platt, with severe eyes, "you can walk. Till then, take all orders at the run. Once more, to make sure." Harvey was in a glow with the exercise, and this last cut warmed him thoroughly. Now he was a singularly smart boy, the son of a very clever man and a very sensitive woman, with a fine resolute temper that systematic spoiling had nearly turned to mulish obstinacy. He looked at the other men, and saw that even Dan did not smile. It was evidently all in a day's work, though it hurt abominably, so he swallowed the hint with a gulp and a gasp and a grin. The same smartness that led him to take such advantage of his mother made him very sure that no one on the boat, except maybe Penn, would stand the least nonsense. One learns a great deal from a mere tone. Long Jack called over half a dozen more ropes, and Harvey danced over the deck like an eel at ebb tide, one eye on Tom Platt. Very good done," said Manuel. "After supper I show you a little schooner I make, with all her ropes. So we shall learn." "First class for a passenger," said Dan. "Dad, he's just allowed you be wuth your salt maybe 'fore you drowned. That's a heap fer Dad. I'll learn you more our next watch together."
"Taller,"
grunted Disko, peering through the fog as it smoked over the bows. There was nothing to be seen 10 feet beyond the surging jib boom, while alongside rolled the endless procession of solemn, pale waves, whispering and upping one to the other. "Now I'll learn you something Long Jack can't," shouted Tom Platt, as from a locker by the stern he produced a battered deep-sea lead hollowed at one end, smeared the hollow from a saucer full of mutton tallow, and went forward. "I'll learn you how to fly the Blue Pigeon. Shoo!" Disko did something to the wheel that checked the schooner's way, while Manuel, with Harvey to help, and a proud boy was Harvey, let down the jib in a lump on the boom. The lead sung a deep droning song as Tom Platt whirled it round and round. "Go ahead, man," said Long Jack impatiently. "We're not drawing 25 foot off Fire Island in a fog. There's no trick to it." "Don't be jealous, Galway." The released lead plopped into the sea far ahead as the schooner surged slowly forward. "Soundin' is a trick, though," said Dan. "When your dipsy lead's all the eye you're like to hev fer a week. What d'ye make it, Dad?" Disko's face relaxed. His skill and honor were involved in the march he had stolen on the rest of the fleet, and he had his reputation as a master artist who knew the Banks blindfold.
60, maybe, if I'm any judge,"
he replied, with a glance at the tiny compass in the window of the house. 60, sung out Tom Platt, hauling in great wet coils. The schooner gathered way once more.
"Heave,"
said Disko, after a quarter of an hour. "What do you make it?" Dan whispered, and he looked at Harvey proudly. But Harvey was too proud of his own performances to be impressed just then.
50,
said the father.
"I mistrust we're right over the nick of Green Bank on old 65.
50, roared Tom Platt. They could scarcely see him through the fog. "She's bust within a yard, like the shells at Fort Macon." "Bait up, Harve," said Dan, diving for a line on the reel. The schooner seemed to be straying promiscuously through the smother, her head sail banging wildly. The men waited and looked at the boys, who began fishing. "Heh!" Dan's lines twitched on the scored and scarred rail. "Now how in thunder did Dad know? Help us here, Harve. It's a big un. Poke hook, too." They hauled together, and landed a goggle-eyed 20-pound cod. He had taken the bait right into his stomach.
"Why, he's all covered with little crabs," cried Harvey, turning him over.
"By the great hook block, they're lousy already," said Long Jack. "Disko, you keep your spare eyes under the keel." Splash went the anchor, and they all heaved over the lines, each man taking his place at the bulwarks.
"Are they good to eat?"
Harvey panted as he lugged in another crab-covered cod.
"Sure. When they're lousy, it's a sign they've all been herdin' together by the thousand, and when they take the bait that way, they're hungry. Never mind how the bait sets, they'll bite on the bare hook."
"Say, this is great!" Harvey cried as the fish came in gasping and splashing, nearly all poke-hooked, as Dan had said.
"Why can't we always fish from the boat instead of from the dories?" "Allus can, till we begin to dress down. After that, the heads and offals 'd scare the fish to Fundy. Boat fishin' ain't reckoned progressive, though, unless you know as much as Dad knows. Guess we'll run out our trawl to night. Harder on the back this than from the dory, ain't it?"
It was rather back-breaking work, for in a dory the weight of a cod is water-borne till the last minute, and you are, so to speak, abreast of him; but the few feet of a schooner's freeboard make so much extra dead-hauling, and stooping over the bulwarks cramps the stomach. But it was wild and furious sport, so long as it lasted, and a big pile lay aboard when the fish ceased biting.
"Where's Penn and Uncle Salters?"
Harvey asked, slapping the slime off his oilskins, and reeling up the line in careful imitation of the others.
"Gets coffee and see."
Under the yellow glare of the lamp on the pawl-post, the forecastle table down and opened, utterly unconscious of fish or weather, sat the two men, a checkerboard between them, Uncle Salters snarling at Penn's every move. "What's the matter now?" said the former, as Harvey, one hand in the leather loop at the head of the ladder, hung shouting to the cook.
"Big fish and lousy. Heaps and heaps," Harvey replied, quoting Long Jack. "How's the game?"
Little Penn's jaw dropped.
"'Tweren't none o' his fault," snapped Uncle Salters. "Penn's deef."
"Checkers, weren't it?"
said Dan, as Harvey staggered aft with the steaming coffee in a tin pail.
"That lets us out of cleanin' up to night. Dad's a just man. They'll have to do it."
"And two young fellers I know'll bait up a tub or so of trawl while they're cleanin'," said Disko, lashing the wheel to his taste.
Guess I'd rather clean up, Dad."
"Don't doubt it. You won't, though. Dress down. Dress down. Penn'll pitch while you two bait up."
"Why in thunder didn't them blame boys tell us you'd struck on?" said Uncle Salters, shuffling to his place at the table. "This knife's gum blunt, Dan."
"If stickin' out cable don't wake you, guess you'd better hire a boy of your own," said Dan, muddling about in the dusk over the tubs full of trawl line lashed to windward of the house. "Oh, Harve, don't you want to slip down and git's bait?"
"Bait as we are," said Disko. "I mistrust shag fishin' will pay better, as things go."
That meant the boys would bait with selected offal of the cod as the fish were cleaned, an improvement on paddling barehanded in the little bait barrels below. The tubs were full of neatly coiled line carrying a big hook every few feet, and the testing and baiting of every single hook, with the stowage of the baited line so that it should run clear when shot from the dory, was a scientific business. Dan managed it in the dark without looking, while Harvey caught his fingers on the barbs and bewailed his fate. But the hooks flew through Dan's fingers like tatting on an old maid's lap.
"I helped bait up trawl ashore 'fore I could well walk," he said, "but it's a putterin' job all the same. Oh, Dad!" This shouted towards the hatch where Disko and Tom Platt were salting. "How many skates you reckon we'll need?"
"'Bout 3. Hurry."
"There's 300 fathom to each tub," Dan explained. "More'n enough to lay out to night. Ouch! Slipped up there, I did." He stuck his finger in his mouth. "I tell you, Harve, there ain't money in Gloucester'd hire me to ship on a regular trawler. It may be progressive, but, barrin' that,
It's the putteringest, slim-jammest business top of earth." "I don't know what this is, if 'tisn't regular trawlin'," said Harvey sulkily. "My fingers are all cut to frazzles." "Pshaw! This is jest one o' Dad's blame experiments. He don't trawl 'less there's mighty good reason fer it. Dad knows. That's why he's baitin' as he is. We'll have her saggin' full when we take her up, or we won't see a fin." Penn and Uncle Salters cleaned up as Disko had ordained, but the boys profited little. No sooner were the tubs furnished than Tom Platt and Long Jack, who had been exploring the inside of a dory with a lantern, snatched them away, loaded up the tubs in some small, painted trawl buoys, and hove the boat overboard into what Harvey regarded as an exceedingly rough sea. "They'll be drowned! Why, the dory's loaded like a freight car!" he cried. "We'll be back," said Long Jack, "and in case you're not lookin' for us, we'll lay into you both if the trawl's snarled." The dory surged up on the crest of a wave, and just when it seemed impossible that she could avoid smashing against the schooner's side, slid over the ridge and was swallowed up in the damp dusk. "Take a hold here, and keep ringin' steady," said Dan, passing Harvey the lanyard of a bell that hung just behind the windlass. Harvey rang lustily, for he felt 2 lives depended on him. But Disko in the cabin, scrawling in the logbook, did not look like a murderer, and when he went to supper he even smiled dryly at the anxious Harvey. "This ain't no weather," said Dan. "Why, you and me could set that trawl. They've only gone out jest far enough so as not to foul our cable. They don't need no bell really." Clang, clang, clang. Harvey kept it up, varied with occasional rub-a-dubs, for another half-hour. There was a bellow and a bump alongside. Manuel and Dan raced to the hooks of the dory tackle. Long Jack and Tom Platt arrived on deck together, it seemed, one half the North Atlantic at their backs, and the dory followed them in the air, landing with a clatter. "Nary a snarl," said Tom Platt as he dripped. "Danny, you'll do yet." "The pleasure of your company to the banquet," said Long Jack, squelching the water from his boots as he capered like an elephant and stuck an oilskinned arm into Harvey's face. "We do be condescended to honor the second half wid our presence." And off they all 4 rolled to supper, where Harvey stuffed himself to the brim on fish chowder and fried pies, and fell fast asleep just as Manuel produced from a locker a lovely 2-foot model of the Lucy Holmes, his first boat, and was going to show Harvey the ropes. Harvey never even twiddled his fingers as Penn pushed him into his bunk. "It must be a sad thing, a very sad thing," said Penn, watching the boy's face, "for his mother and his father, who think he's dead. To lose a child, to lose a man-child." "Get out of this, Penn," said Dan. "Go aft and finish your game with Uncle Salters. Tell Dad I'll stand Harve's watch if he don't keer. He's played out." "Very good boy," said Manuel, slipping out of his boots and disappearing into the black shadows of the lower bunk. "'Spect he make good man, Danny. I no see he is any so mad as your papa he says. Eh, what?" Dan chuckled, but the chuckle ended in a snore. It was thick weather outside, with a rising wind, and the elder men stretched their watches. The hours struck clear in the cabin. The nosing bows slapped and scuffled with the seas. The forecastle stovepipe hissed and sputtered as the spray caught it, and the boys slept on, while Disko, Long Jack, Tom Platt, and Uncle Salters, each in turn, stumped aft to look at the wheel, forward to see that the anchor held, or to veer out a little more cable against chafing, with a glance at the dim anchor light between each round. End of chapter. Captains Courageous by Rudyard Kipling. Chapter 4. Harvey waked to find the first half at breakfast, the forecastle door drawn to a crack, and every square inch of the schooner singing its own tune. The black bulk of the cook balanced behind the tiny galley, over the glare of the stove, and the pots and pans in the pierced wooden board before it jarred and racketed to each plunge.
Up and up the forecastle climbed, yearning and surging and quivering, and then, with a clear sickle-like swoop, came down into the seas. He could hear the flaring bows cut and squelch, and there was a pause ere the divided waters came down on the deck above, like a volley of buckshot. Followed the woolly sound of the cable in the hawse-hole, a grunt and squeal of the windlass, a yaw, a punt, and a kick, and the We're Here gathered herself together to repeat the motions. "Now ashore," he heard Long Jack saying, "ye've chores, and ye must do them in any weather. Here we're well clear of the fleet, and we've no chores, and that's a blessin'. Good night, all." He passed like a big snake from the table to his bunk, and began to smoke. Tom Platt followed his example. Uncle Salters, with Penn, fought his way up the ladder to stand his watch, and the cook set for the second half. It came out of its bunks as the others had entered theirs, with a shake and a yawn. It ate till it could eat no more, and then Manuel filled his pipe with some terrible tobacco, crouched himself between the pawl post and a forward bunk, cocked his feet up on the table, and smiled tender and indolent smiles at the smoke. Dan lay at length in his bunk, wrestling with a gaudy, gilt-stopped accordion, whose tunes went up and down with the pitching of the We're Here. The cook, his shoulders against the locker where he kept the fried pies (Dan was fond of fried pies), peeled potatoes, with one eye on the stove in event of too much water finding its way down the pipe, and the general smell and smother were past all description. Harvey considered affairs, wondered that he was not deathly sick, and crawled into his bunk again, as the softest and safest place, while Dan struck up, "I don't want to play in your yard," as accurately as the wild jerks allowed. "How long is this for?" Harvey asked of Manuel. "Till she get a little quiet, and we can roll to trawl. Perhaps to-night. Perhaps 2 days more. You do not like, eh, what?" "I should have been crazy sick a week ago, but it doesn't seem to upset me now, much." "That is because we make you a fisherman, these days. If I was you, when I come to Gloucester, I would give 2, 3 big candles for my good luck." "Give who?" "To be sure, the Virgin of our church on the hill. She is very good to fishermen all the time. That is why so few of us Portuguese men ever are drowned." "You're a Roman Catholic, then?" "I am a Madeira man. I am not a Porto Rico boy. Shall I be Baptist, then? Eh, what? I always give candles. 2, 3 more when I come to Gloucester. The good Virgin, she never forgets me, Manuel." "I don't sense it that way," Tom Platt put in from his bunk, his scarred face lit up by the glare of a match as he sucked at his pipe. "It stands to reason the sea's the sea, and you'll get just about what's goin', candles or kerosene, for that matter." "'Tis a mighty good thing," said Long Jack, "to have a friend at court, though. I'm a Manuel's way o' thinkin'. About 10 years back I was crew to a South Boston market boat. We was off Minot's Ledge with a northeaster, butt first atop of us, thicker'n burgoo. The old man was drunk. His chin was waggin' on the tiller, and I says to myself, if ever I stick my boat-hook into T Wharf again, I'll show the saints fwhat matter of craft they saved me out of. Now I'm here, as ye can well see, and the model of the dirty old Kathleen, that took me a month to make, I give it to the priest, and he hung it up forninst the altar. There's more sense in giving a model that's by way of being a work of art than any candle. Ye can buy candles at store, but a model shows the good saints you've took trouble and are grateful." "Do you believe that, Irish?" said Tom Platt, turning on his elbow. "Would I do it if I did not, Ohio?" "Well, Enoch Fuller, he made a model of the old Ohio, and she's to Salem Museum now. Mighty pretty model, too, but I guess Enoch he never done it for no sacrifice, and the way I take it is—" There were the makings of an hour-long discussion of the kind that fishermen love, where the talk runs in shouting circles and no one proves anything at the end, had not Dan struck up this cheerful rhyme: "Up jumped the mackerel with his striped back,
Reef in the mainsail and haul on the tack, for it's windy weather." Here Long Jack joined in. "And it's blowy weather. When the winds begin to blow, pipe all hands together." Dan went on, with a cautious look at Tom Platt, holding the accordion low in the bunk. "Up jumped the cod with his chucklehead, went to the main chains to heave at the lead, for it's windy weather," etc. Tom Platt seemed to be hunting for something. Dan crouched lower, but sang louder. "Up jumped the flounder that swims to the ground. Chucklehead, chucklehead, mind where ye sound." Tom Platt's huge rubber boot whirred across the foc'sle and caught Dan's uplifted arm. There was war between the man and the boy ever since Dan had discovered that the mere whistling of that tune would make him angry as he heaved the lead. "Thought I'd fetch ye," said Dan, returning the gift with precision. "If you don't like my music, git out your fiddle. I ain't goin' to lie here all day and listen to you and Long Jack arguin' about candles. Fiddle, Tom Platt, or I'll learn Harve here the tune." Tom Platt leaned down to a locker and brought up an old white fiddle. Manuel's eye glistened, and from somewhere behind the pawl post he drew out a tiny guitar-like thing with wire strings, which he called a natchet. "'Tis a concert," said Long Jack, beaming through the smoke. "A regular Boston concert." There was a burst of spray as the hatch opened, and Disko in yellow oilskins descended. "You're just in time, Disko. What you doin' outside?"
"Just this." He dropped on to the lockers with the push and heave of the We're Here.
"We're singin' to keep our breakfast down. You lead, of course, Disko," said Long Jack.
"Guess there ain't more'n about 2 old songs I know, and you've heard 'em both."
His excuses were cut short by Tom Platt launching into a most dolorous tune, like unto the moaning of winds and the creaking of masts. With his eyes fixed on the beams above, Disko began this ancient ditty, Tom Platt flourishing all around him to make the tune and words fit a little.
"There is a crack packet of fame. She hails from New York, and the Dreadnought's her name. You may talk of your flyers, Swallowtail and Black Ball, but the Dreadnought's the packet that can beat them all. Now the Dreadnought she lies in the River Mersey, because of the tugboat to take her to sea. But when she's off soundings, you shortly will know." Chorus. "She's the Liverpool packet, oh Lord, let her go. Now the Dreadnought she's howling 'cross the banks of Newfoundland, where the water's all shallow and the bottom's all sand. Says all the little fishes that swim to and fro." Chorus. "She's the Liverpool packet, oh Lord, let her go." There were scores of verses, for he worked the Dreadnought every mile of the way between Liverpool and New York as conscientiously as though he were on her deck, and the accordion pumped and the fiddle squeaked beside him. Tom Platt followed with something about the rough and tough McGinn who would pilot the vessel in. Then they called on Harvey, who felt very flattered, to contribute to the entertainment, but all that he could remember were some pieces of Skipper Ireson's Ride that he had been taught at the camp school in the Adirondacks. It seemed that they might be appropriate to the time and place, but he had no more than mentioned the title when Disko brought down one foot with a bang and cried, "Don't go on, young feller. That's a mistaken judgment. One of the worst kind, too, because it's catchin' to the ear."
"I oughter have warned you," said Dan. "That allus fetches Dad." "What's wrong?" said Harvey, surprised and a little angry.
"All you're going to say," said Disko. "All dead wrong from start to finish, and Whittier he's to blame. I have no special call to right any Marblehead man, but 'tweren't no fault of Ireson's. My father he told me the tale time and again, and this is the way it was."
"For the 100th time," put in Long Jack under his breath.
"Ben Ireson he was skipper of the Betty, young feller, comin' home from the Banks. That was before the war of 1812, but justice is justice at all times. They found the active of Portland, and Gibbons of that town he was her skipper. They found her leakin' off Cape Cod Light. There was a terrible gale on, and they was gettin' the Betty home as fast as they could crowd her, Well, Ireson, he said there warn't any sense to reskin' a boat in that sea. The men they wouldn't hev it, and he laid it before them to stay by the Active till the sea run down a piece. They wouldn't hev that either, hangin' round the Cape in any such weather, leak or no leak. They just up stays and quit, naturally takin' Ireson with them. Folks to Marblehead was mad at him not runnin' the risk, and because next day, when the sea was calm, they never stopped to think o' that. Some o' the Active's folk was took off by a Truro man. They come into Marblehead with their own tale to tell, sayin' how Ireson had shamed his town, and so forth and so on, and Ireson's men they was scared, seein' public feelin' agin 'em, and they went back on Ireson, and swore he was responsible for the hull act. 'Tweren't the women neither that tarred and feathered him. Marblehead women don't act that way. 'Twas a passel o' men and boys, and they carted him around town in an old dory till the bottom fell out, and Ireson he told 'em they'd be sorry for it some day. Well, the facts come out later, same as they usually do, too late to be anyways useful to an honest man, and Whittier he come along and picked up the slack end of a lyin' tale, and tarred and feathered Ben Ireson all over onct more after he was dead. 'Twas the only time Whittier ever slipped up, and 'tweren't fair. I whaled Dan good when he brought that piece back from school. Tots don't know no better, o' course, but I'd give you the facts, hereafter and evermore to be remembered. Ben Ireson weren't no such kind of man as Whittier makes him out. My father, he knew him well, before and after that business, and you beware o' hasty judgments, young feller. Next!"
Harvey had never heard Disko talk so long, and collapsed with burning cheeks. But, as Dan said promptly, a boy could only learn what he was taught at school, and life was too short to keep track of every lie along the coast. Then Manuel touched the jangling, jarring little nachette to a queer tune, and sang something in Portuguese about Nina Innocente, ending with a full-handed sweep that brought the song up with a jerk. Then Disko obliged with his second song, to an old-fashioned creaky tune, and all joined in the chorus. This is one stanza:
"Now April is over and melted the snow, and out o' New Bedford we shortly must tow. Yes, out o' New Bedford we shortly must clear. We're the whalers that never see wheat in the ear."
Here the fiddle went very softly for a while by itself, and then:
"Wheat in the ear, my true love's posy blowin'. Wheat in the ear, we're goin' off to sea. Wheat in the ear, I left you fit for sowin'. When I come back a loaf o' bread you'll be." That made Harvey almost weep, though he could not tell why. But it was much worse when the cook dropped the potatoes and held out his hands for the fiddle. Still leaning against the locker door, he struck into a tune that was like something very bad but sure to happen whatever you did. After a little he sang in an unknown tongue, his big chin down on the fiddle-tail, his white eyeballs glaring in the lamplight. Harvey swung out of his bunk to hear better, and amid the straining of the timbers and the wash of the waters, the tune crooned and moaned on, like lee surf in a blind fog, till it ended with a wail.
"Jimmy Christmas! That gives me the blue creevies," said Dan. "What in thunder is it?"
"The song of Finn McCool," said the cook, "when he was goin' to Norway."
His English was not thick, but all clear-cut as though it came from a phonograph.
"Faith, I've been to Norway, but I didn't make that unwholesome noise. 'Tis like some of the old songs, though," said Long Jack, sighing.
"Don't let's have another without something between," said Dan, and the accordion struck up a rattling, catchy tune that ended: "It's 6 and 20 Sundays since last we saw the land, with 1500 quintal, and 1500 quintal, 1,500 toppin' quintal, twixt old Quiru and Grand."
"Hold on!" roared Tom Platt. "Do you want to nail the trip, Dan? That's Jonah, sure, 'less you sing it after all our salt's wet."
"No, 'tain't. Is it, Dad? Not unless you sing the very last verse. You can't learn me anything on Jonahs."
"What's that?" said Harvey.
"What's a Jonah?"
A Jonah's anything that spoils the luck. Sometimes it's a man, sometimes it's a boy, or a bucket. I've known a splittin'-knife Jonah 2 trips till we was on to her," said Tom Platt. "There's all sorts of Jonahs. Jim Bourke was one till he was drowned on George's. I'd never ship with Jim Bourke, not if I was starvin'. There was a green dory on the Ezra flood. That was a Jonah too, the worst sort of Jonah. Drowned 4 men, she did, and used to shine fiery of nights in the nest." "And you believe that?" said Harvey, remembering what Tom Platt had said about candles and models. "Haven't we all got to take what's served?" A mutter of dissent ran around the bunks. "Outboard, yes. Inboard, things can happen," said Disko. "Don't you go making a mock of Jonahs, young feller." "Well, Harve ain't no Jonah. Day after we catched him," Dan cut in, "we had a toppin' good catch." The cook threw up his head and laughed suddenly, a queer, thin laugh. He was a most disconcerting nigger. "Murder!" said Long Jack. "Don't do that again, doctor. We ain't used to it." "What's wrong?" said Dan. "Ain't he our mascot? And didn't they strike on good after we'd struck him?" "Oh, yes," said the cook. "I know that, but the catch is not finished yet."
"He ain't going to do us any harm," said Dan hotly. "Where are you hittin' and edgin' to? He's all right."
"No harm, no. But one day he will be your master, Danny."
"That all?" said Dan placidly. "He won't, not by a jugful."
"Master," said the cook, pointing to Harvey. "Man," and he pointed to Dan.
"That's news. How soon?" said Dan, with a laugh.
"In some years, and I shall see it. Master and man, man and master."
"How in thunder did you work that out?" said Tom Platt.
"In my head, where I can see."
"How?"
This from all the others at once. "I do not know, but so it will be." He dropped his head and went on peeling the potatoes, and not another word could they get out of him.
"Well," said Dan, "a heap o' things'll have to come about 'fore Harve's any master o' mine, but I'm glad the doctor ain't choosin' to mark him for a Jonah. Now I mistrust Uncle Salters for the Jonahest Jonah in the fleet regardin' his own special luck. Dunno if it's spreadin' same as smallpox. He ought to be on the Carrie Pitman. That boat's her own Jonah, sure. Crews and gear make no differ to her driftin'. Jimmy Christmas! She'll etch loose in a flat calm."
"Well, we'll clear of the fleet, anyway," said Disko. "Carrie Pitman and all."
There was a rapping on the deck. "Uncle Salters has catched his luck," said Dan as his father departed.
"It's blown clear,"
Disko cried, and all the foc'sle tumbled up for a bit of fresh air. The fog had gone, but a sullen sea ran in great rollers behind it. The We're Here slid, as it were, into long sunk avenues and ditches which felt quite sheltered and homelike if they would only stay still; but they changed without rest or mercy, and flung up the schooner to crown one peak of 1,000 gray hills, while the wind hooted through her rigging as she zigzagged down the slopes. Far away a sea would burst in a sheet of foam, and the others would follow suit as at a signal, till Harvey's eyes swam with a vision of interlacing whites and grays. 4 or 5 Mother Carey's chickens stormed round in circles, shrieking as they swept past the bows. A rain squall or two strayed aimlessly over the hopeless waste, ran down wind and back again, and melted away.
"Seems to me I saw something flicker just now over yonder," said Uncle Salters, pointing to the northeast. "Can't be any of the fleet," said Disko, peering under his eyebrows, a hand on the foc'sle gangway as the solid bows hatcheted into the troughs. "Sea's oilin' over dreadful fast. Danny, don't you want to skip up a piece and see how our trawl buoy lays?"
Danny, in his big boots, trotted rather than climbed up the main rigging. This consumed Harvey with envy. Hitched himself around the reeling crosstrees, and let his eye rove till it caught the tiny black buoy flag on the shoulder of a mile-away swell. "She's all right," he hailed. Sail low! Dead to the north'ard, comin' down like smoke. Schooner she be, too." They waited another half hour, the sky clearing in patches, with a flicker of sickly sun from time to time that made patches of olive green water. Then a stump foremast lifted, ducked, and disappeared, to be followed on the next wave by a high stern with old-fashioned wooden snail's horn davits. The sails were red-tanned. "Frenchman!" shouted Dan. "No, 'tain't neither. Dad!"
"That's no French," said Disko. "Salters, your blame luck holds tighter'n a screw in a keghead."
"I've eyes. It's Uncle Abishai."
"You can't nowise tell for sure."
"The head king of all Jonahs," groaned Tom Platt. "Oh, Salters, Salters, why wasn't you abed and asleep?" "How could I tell?" said poor Salters as the schooner swung up. She might have been the very Flying Dutchman, so foul, draggled, and unkempt was every rope and stick aboard. Her old-style quarter-deck was some 4 or 5 feet high, and her rigging flew knotted and tangled like weed at a wharf-end. She was running before the wind, yawing frightfully, her staysail let down to act as a sort of extra foresail, scandalized, they call it, and her foreboom guyed out over the side. Her bowsprit cocked up like an old-fashioned frigate's. Her jib-boom had been fished and spliced and nailed and clamped beyond further repair, and as she hove herself forward and sat down on her broad tail, she looked for all the world like a blowsy, frowsy, bad old woman sneering at a decent girl. "That's Abishai," said Salters, "full o' gin and Judic men, and the judgments o' Providence layin' for 'em and never takin' good holt. He's run into bait, Miquelon way." "He run her under," said Long Jack. "That's no rig for this weather."
"Not he, or he'd ha' done it long ago," Disko replied. "Looks as if he's calculated to run us under. Ain't she down by the head more'n natural, Tom Platt?"
"If it's his style of loadin' her, she ain't safe," said the sailor slowly. "If she's spewed her oakum, he'd better get to his pumps mighty quick." The creature thrashed up, wore round with a clatter and rattle, and lay head to wind within earshot. A graybeard wagged over the bulwark, and a thick voice yelled something Harvey could not understand. But Disko's face darkened.
"He'd risk every stick he hez to carry bad news. Says we're in for a shift of wind. He's in for worse. Abishai! Abishai!" He waved his arm up and down with the gesture of a man at the pumps, and pointed forward. The crew mocked him and laughed. "Jounce ye and strip ye and trip ye!" yelled Uncle Abishai. "A livin' gale! A livin' gale! Yah! Cast up fer your last trip, all you Gloucester haddocks! You won't see Gloucester no more, no more!" "Crazy full, as usual," said Tom Platt. "Wish he hadn't spied us, though." She drifted out of hearing while the gray head yelled something about a dance at the Bay of Bulls, and a dead man in the forecastle. Harvey shuddered. He had seen the sloven-tilled decks and the savage-eyed crew. "And that's a fine little floatin' hell for a draft," said Long Jack. "I wonder what mischief she's been at ashore." "He's a trawler," Dan explained to Harvey, "and he runs her for bait all along the coast. Oh, no, not home. He don't go. He deals along the south and east shore up yonder." He nodded in the direction of the pitiless Newfoundland beaches. "Dad won't never take me ashore there. They're a mighty tough crowd, and Abishai's the toughest. You saw his boat? Well, she's nigh 70 old, they say, the last of the old Marblehead heel tappers. They don't make them quarter-decks any more. Abishai don't use Marblehead, though. He ain't wanted there. He just drifts around in debt, trawlin' and cussin' like you've heard. Been a Jonah for years and years, he says. Gets liquor from the free camp boats for makin' spells and sellin' winds and such truck. Crazy, I guess." "'Twon't be any use underrunnin' the trawl tonight," said Tom Platt with quiet despair. "He come alongside special to cuss us. I'd give my wage and share to see him at the gangway of the old Ohio 'fore we quit floggin'. Just about 6 dozen, and Sam Mocatta layin' 'em on criss-cross." The dishevelled heel-tapper danced drunkenly down-wind, and all eyes followed her. Suddenly the cook cried in his phonograph voice, "It was his own death made him speak so. He is Fay. Fay, I tell you. Look!" She sailed into a patch of watery sunshine 3 or 4 miles distant. The patch dulled and faded out, and even as the light passed, so did the schooner. She dropped into a hollow and was not. "Run under, by the great hock block!" shouted Disko, jumping aft. "Drunk or sober, we've got to help 'em. Heave short and break her out. Smart!" Harvey was thrown on the deck by the shock that followed the setting of the jib and foresail, for they hove short on the cable, and, to save time, jerked the anchor bodily from the bottom, heaving in as they moved away. This is a bit of brute force seldom resorted to except in matters of life and death, and the little We're Here complained like a human. They ran down to where Abishai's craft had vanished, found 2 or 3 trawl tubs, a gin bottle, and a stove-in dory, but nothing more. "Let 'em go," said Disko, though no one had hinted at picking them up. "I wouldn't have a match that belonged to Abishai aboard. Guess she run clear under. Must have been spewin' her oakum for a week, and they never thought to pump her. That's one more boat gone along a leavin' port all hands drunk."
"Glory be!" said Long Jack. "We'd have been obliged to help 'em if they were top o' water."
"Thinkin' of that myself," said Tom Platt. "Fay, Fay," said the cook, rolling his eyes. "He has taken his own luck with him."
"Very good thing, I think, to tell the fleet when we see. Eh, what?" said Manuel. "If you run her that way before the wind, and she work open her seams—" He threw out his hands with an indescribable gesture, while Penn sat down on the house and sobbed at the sheer horror and pity of it all. Harvey could not realize that he had seen death on the open waters, but he felt very sick. Then Dan went up the crosstrees, and Disko steered them back to within sight of their own trawl buoys just before the fog blanketed the sea once again.
"We go mighty quick hereabouts when we do go," was all he said to Harvey. "You think on that for a spell, young feller. That was liquor." After dinner it was calm enough to fish from the decks. Penn and Uncle Salters were very zealous this time, and the catch was large and large fish.
"Abishai surely took his luck with him," said Salters. "The wind hain't back nor riz nor nothin'. How about the trawl? I despise superstition, anyway." Tom Platt insisted that they had much better haul the thing and make a new berth, but the cook said, "The luck is in 2 pieces. You will find it so when you look. I know." This so tickled Long Jack that he overbore Tom Platt, and the two went out together. Underrunning a trawl means pulling it in on one side of the dory, picking off the fish, rebaiting the hooks, and passing them back to the sea again, something like pinning and unpinning linen on a wash-line. It is a lengthy business, and rather dangerous, for the long, sagging line may twitch a boat under in a flash. But when they heard, "And now to thee, O Capting," booming out of the fog, the crew of the We're Here took heart. The dory swirled alongside well loaded, Tom Platt yelling for Manuel to act as relief boat. "The luck's cut square in 2 pieces," said Long Jack, forking in the fish, while Harvey stood open-mouthed at the skill with which the plunging dory was saved from destruction. "One half was just punkins. Tom Platt wanted to haul her, and had done with it, but I said, I'll back the doctor that has the second sight, and the other half come up sagging full of big uns. Hurry, Manny, and bring a tub of bait. There's luck afloat to-night." The fish bit at the newly baited hooks from which their brethren had just been taken, and Tom Platt and Long Jack moved methodically up and down the length of the trawl, the boat's nose surging under the wet line of hooks, stripping the sea cucumbers that they called pumpkins, slatting off the fresh-caught cod against the gunwale, rebaiting,
and loading Manuel's dory till dusk. "I'll take no risks," said Disko, then. "Not with him floatin' around so near. Abishai won't sink for a week. Heave in the dories, and we'll dress down after supper." That was a mighty dressing down, attended by 3 or 4 blowing grampuses. It lasted till 9 o'clock, and Disko was thrice heard to chuckle as Harvey pitched the split fish into the hold. "Say, you're haulin' ahead dreadful fast," said Dan, when they ground the knives after the men had turned in. "There's somethin' of a sea to-night, and I hain't heard you made no remarks on it." "Too busy," Harvey replied, testing a blade's edge. "Come to think of it, she is a high kicker." The little schooner was gambolling all around her anchor among the silver-tipped waves. Backing with a start of affected surprise at the sight of the strained cable, she pounced on it like a kitten, while the spray of her descent burst through the hawse-holes with the report of a gun. Shaking her head, she would say, "Well, I'm sorry I can't stay any longer with you. I'm going north," and would sidle off, halting suddenly with a dramatic rattle of her rigging. "And I was just going to observe," she would begin, as gravely as a drunken man addressing a lamp-post. The rest of the sentence (she acted her words in dumb show, of course) was lost in a fit of fidgets, when she behaved like a puppy chewing a string, a clumsy woman in a side-saddle, a hen with her head cut off, or a cow stung by a hornet, exactly as the whims of the sea took her. "See her sayin' her piece. She's Patrick Henry now," said Dan. She swung sideways on a roller, and gesticulated with her jib boom from port to starboard. "But ez fer me, give me liberty, or give me death." Whop! She sat down in the moon path on the water, curtsying with a flourish of pride impressive enough, had not the wheel gear sniggered mockingly in its box. Harvey laughed aloud. "Why, it's just as if she was alive," he said. "She's as stiddy as a house and dry as a herrin'," said Dan, enthusiastically, as he was stung across the deck in a batter of spray. "Fends 'em off and fends 'em off, and 'Don't you come nigh me,' she says. Look at her. Just look at her. Sakes, you should see one of them toothpicks h'isting up her anchor on her spike over 15-fathom water." "What's a toothpick, Dan?" "Them new haddockers and herrin' boats. Fine as a yacht forward, with yacht sterns to 'em, and spike bowsprits, and a house that'd take our hold. I've heard that Burgess himself he made the models for 3 or 4 of 'em. Dad's sot against 'em on account of their pitchin' and joltin', but there heaps o' money in 'em. Dad can find fish, but he ain't no ways progressive. He don't go with the march o' the times. They're chock full o' labor-savin' jigs and sech all. Ever seed the Elector o' Gloucester? She's a daisy, if she is a toothpick." "What do they cost, Dan?" "Hills of dollars. 15,000, perhaps. More, maybe. There's gold leaf and everything you can think of." Then, to himself, half under his breath, "Guess I'd call her Hattie S., too." End of chapter. Captains Courageous by Rudyard Kipling. Chapter 5. That was the first of many talks with Dan, who told Harvey why he would transfer his dory's name to the imaginary Burgess-modelled haddocker. Harvey heard a good deal more about the real Hattie at Gloucester, saw a lock of her hair, which Dan, finding fair words of no avail, had hooked as she sat in front of him at school that winter, and a photograph. Hattie was about 14 years old, with an awful contempt for boys, and had been trampling on Dan's heart through the winter. All this was revealed under oath of solemn secrecy on moonlit decks, in the dead dark, or in choking fog, the whining wheel behind them, the climbing deck before, and without, the unresting, clamorous sea. Once, of course, as the boys came to know each other, there was a fight, which raged from bow to stern till Penn came up and separated them, but promised not to tell Disko, who thought fighting on watch rather worse than sleeping. Harvey was no match for Dan physically, but it says a great deal for his new training that he took his defeat and did not try to get even with his conqueror by underhand methods. That was after he had been cured of a string of boils between his elbows and wrists, where the wet jersey and oilskins cut into the flesh. The salt water stung them unpleasantly, but when they were ripe Dan treated them with Disko's razor, and assured Harvey that now he was a blooded banker, the affliction of gurry sores being the mark of the caste that claimed him. Since he was a boy, and very busy, he did not bother his head with too much thinking. He was exceedingly sorry for his mother, and often longed to see her, and above all to tell her of his wonderful new life, and how brilliantly he was acquitting himself in it. Otherwise he preferred not to wonder too much how she was bearing the shock of his supposed death. But one day, as he stood on the forecastle ladder, guying the cook, who had accused him of Dan of hooking fried pies, it occurred to him that this was a vast improvement on being snubbed by strangers in the smoking room of a hired liner. He was a recognized part of the scheme of things on the We're Here, had his place at the table and among the bunks, and could hold his own in the long talks on stormy days, when the others were always ready to listen to what they called his fairy tales of his life ashore. It did not take him more than 2 days and a quarter to feel that if he spoke of his own life, it seemed very far away. No one except Dan, and even Dan's belief was sorely tried, credited him. So he invented a friend, a boy he had heard of, who drove a miniature 4-pony drag in Toledo, Ohio, and ordered 5 suits of clothes at a time, and led things called Germans at parties where the oldest girl was not quite 15, but all the presents were solid silver. Salters protested that this kind of yarn was desperately wicked, if not indeed positively blasphemous, but he listened as greedily as the others, and their criticisms at the end gave Harvey entirely new notions on Germans, clothes, cigarettes with gold-leaf tips, rings, watches, scent, small dinner parties, champagne, card-playing, and hotel accommodation. Little by little he changed his tone when speaking of his friend, whom Long Jack had christened the Crazy Kid, the Gilt-edged Baby, the Suckin' Vanderpoop, and other pet names, and with his sea-booted feet cocked up on the table would even invent histories about silk pajamas and specially imported neckwear, to the friend's discredit. Harvey was a very adaptable person, with a keen eye and ear for every face and tone about him. Before long he knew where Disko kept the old green-crusted quadrant that they called the hog yoke, under the bed-bag in his bunk. When he took the sun, and with the help of the old farmer's almanac found the latitude, Harvey would jump down into the cabin and scratch the reckoning and date with a nail on the rust of the stovepipe. Now, the chief engineer of the liner could have done no more, and no engineer of 30 years' service could have assumed 1/2 of the ancient mariner air with which Harvey, first careful to spit over the side, made public the schooner's position for that day, and then and not till then relieved Disko of the quadrant. There is an etiquette in all these things. The said hog yoke, an Eldridge chart, the farming almanac, Blunt's Coast Pilot, and Bowditch's Navigator were all the weapons Disko needed to guide him, except the deep-sea lead that was his spare eye. Harvey nearly slew Penn with it when Tom Platt taught him first how to fly the blue pigeon, and though his strength was not equal to continuous sounding in any sort of a sea, for calm weather with a 7-pound lead on shoal water Disko used him freely. As Dan said, "'Tain't soundin' Dad wants. It's samples. Grease her up good, Harve." Harvey would tallow the cup at the end, and carefully bring the sand, shell, sludge, or whatever it might be, to Disko, who fingered and smelt it and gave a judgment. As has been said, when Disko thought of cod he thought as a cod, and by some long-tested mixture of instinct and experience moved the We're Here from berth to berth, always with the fish, as a blindfolded chess-player moves on the unseen board. But Disko's board was the Grand Bank,
a triangle 250 miles on each side, a waste of wallowing sea cloaked with dank fog, vexed with gales, harried with drifting ice, scored by the tracks of the reckless liners and dotted with the sails of the fishing fleet. For days they worked in fog, Harvey at the bell, till, grown familiar with the thick airs, he went out with Tom Platt, his heart rather in his mouth. But the fog would not lift, and the fish were biting, and no one can stay helplessly afraid for 6 hours at a time. Harvey devoted himself to his lines and the gaff or gobstick as Tom Platt called for them, and they rowed back to the schooner guided by the bell and Tom's instinct, Manuel's conch sounding thin and faint beside them. But it was an unearthly experience, and for the first time in a month Harvey dreamed of the shifting, smoking floors of water round the dory, the lines that strayed away into nothing, and the air above that melted on the sea below 10 feet from his straining eyes. A few days later he was out with Manuel on what should have been 40-fathom bottom. But the whole length of the roding ran out, and still the anchor found nothing, and Harvey grew mortally afraid, for that his last touch with earth was lost. "Whale hole," said Manuel, hauling in. "That is good joke on Disko. Come." And he rowed to the schooner to find Tom Platt and the others jeering at the skipper, because for once he had led them to the edge of the barren Whale Deep, the blank hole of the Grand Bank. They made another berth through the fog, and that time the hair of Harvey's head stood up when he went out in Manuel's dory. A whiteness moved in the whiteness of the fog, with a breath like the breath of the grave, and there was a roaring, a plunging, and spouting. It was his first introduction to the dread summer berg of the Banks, and he cowered in the bottom of the boat while Manuel laughed. There were days, though, clear and soft and warm, when it seemed a sin to do anything but loaf over the hand lines and spank the drifting sun-scalds with an oar, and there were days of light airs, when Harvey was taught how to steer the schooner from one berth to another. It thrilled through him when he first felt the keel answer to his hand on the spokes, and slide over the long hollows as the foresail scythed back and forth against the blue sky. That was magnificent, in spite of Disko saying that it would break a snake's back to follow his wake. But, as usual, pride ran before a fall. They were sailing on the wind with the staysail, an old one, luckily, set, and Harvey jammed her right into it to show Dan how completely he had mastered the art. The foresail went over with a bang, and the foregaff